Chapter 1160. Chapter 1160. Zhao Qian the Elder's sudden appearance, as well as the young man coughing up blood, caused everyone's expressions to shift dramatically. The situation had instantly reversed. The Elder was obviously a member of the Shao family, and judging from his aura, he was far stronger than an Earth Supreme. Yi Zichen, who was still seated, laughed. He looked up calmly at the man in the crack. Then his gaze landed on Chen Chenghe and the others. Chen Chenghe and senior brother Huang of the Yellow Wind sect were as pale as paper. Shao, who was nicknamed the Lightning Tiger. He was the third elder of the Shao family's punishment hall and Shao Zhan's master. He was also a supreme diviner expert. Back then, before the upper three realms were as harmonious as they were now, Shao was already famous far and wide. The battle that made him famous was during the Shao family's resistance against the Yao. He'd single-handedly defeated 1,000,000 enemy elites, killed 3 Earth Fiend Yao divine generals, and heavily injured several others. After all these years, no one knew if he'd taken that final step and become a ruler. "You're the leader of upheaval?" Shao, whose expression was cold, and as he spoke, the 9 heavens rumbled. "You dare collude with Yao? You're truly unforgivable." His thunderous roar reverberated through the clouds. Instantly, Jiao Qi, Meng Huairong, and the Yao ceiling pagoda revealed pained expressions. Yi Zichen and the others sensed nothing out of the ordinary. It was obvious that Shao, who was only targeting Jiao Qi and the other Yao, returned to the Yao ceiling pagoda. Given their strength as Earth Supremes, how could they possibly resist the pressure of a diviner? He transmitted to the Yao in the Yao ceiling pagoda, then disappeared from their line of sight. Everyone watched in astonishment as they disappeared. At that moment, Yi Zichen spoke up. Yi Zichen spoke up. "Senior, may I ask why you're here?" Shao, who furrowed his brows. He'd clearly locked onto Jiao Qi and the others, yet they disappeared right before his eyes. When they vanished, he'd used his divine sense to cover the entire mountain, but still hadn't found their location. It was impossible for an Earth sovereign to lose sight of him. Of course, he wouldn't bring it up. He was a mighty half-step sovereign realm expert. If he let a few Earth Supreme realm demons escape from under his nose, he would lose a lot of face. "You're asking me. I'd like to ask you the same thing. Why did you seal my disciples' divine cores and bind them here? They destroyed my city and wanted to destroy my sect. I captured them and prepared to kill them to pay respect to the souls in the city. They are from the Shao family, my disciples," Shao Hu said with a dark expression. "So what?" Yi Zichen pursed his lips into a smile, then grabbed Shao Zhan by the hair and lifted him up. "You beat up the young, and here comes the old. The Lightning Emperor's Shao family really does live up to their reputation." A playful smile spread across Yi Zichen's face. When Chen Chenghe heard that Yi Zichen dared slander the Shao family, his gaze was filled with astonishment. This was a deva, and most likely a sovereign. If the other party wanted to kill him, a single glance would be enough. Just where did he get the courage to mock him like this? "You're seeking death." Up in the sky, Shao Hu's expression was as dark as the abyss. He slammed his palms through the air and slammed them down on Yi Zichen. His hands blotted out the sun and the sky. Everyone caught a whiff of death. Yi Zichen was already preparing to open the Yao ceiling pagoda. He didn't care if the divine mountain bastards died or not, but he had to save Upheaval's members. However, at that moment, not too far away from where Shao, who had slammed his palms down, a pale white hand appeared and smashed it to pieces. All of a sudden, Shao Hu looked in the direction where the palm had landed. At the foot of the northern divine mountain stood a beautiful middle-aged woman in a jade-green dress. Her skin was fair and her eyes were like peach blossoms. "Zhao Qianhe, what's the meaning of this?" Shao Hu's brows furrowed into a frown when he called out the person's name. The beautiful woman gently smiled, her fingers stroking her white and tender earlobes, her red lips slightly parted. "Tiger Lei, this is the northern divine mountain. Do you really think it's your central divine mountain? How dare you act so rashly? Can't you see that my Shao family is here?" Zhao Qian's expression was as gentle as ever. She held a jade-green umbrella in her left hand as she stared at Shao Hu from afar. I'm sorry, I can't see. Xiao Hu's eyes flashed. Zhao Qianhe was intentionally making trouble for him. What on earth are you doing here? Asked Xiao Hu. Why do you care? This is the Northern Divine Mountains territory. I can go wherever I want. Who are you to tell me what to do? Said Zhao Qianhe disdainfully. But if you dare cause trouble again, I don't mind teaching you a new lesson on behalf of the Lightning Emperor. Xiao Hu's expression instantly froze. Although the woman looked weak and delicate, she held a high position in the Sea of Innocence. She was a third-stage ruler. Xiao Hu had no choice but to fear her. Whoosh! She dared speak to Tiger Lei like this? When the people below heard this, they exploded. In the entire God realm, there were probably no more than 100 people who dared speak to him like this. The people below were all waiting for Tiger Lei's answer, but his response made everyone's jaws drop. Then if I don't do anything, will you just stand by and watch? Tiger Lei admitted defeat. He was a mighty elder of the Lightning Emperor's punishment hall. Back in the day, he'd struck terror into the hearts of all Yao. That depends on my mood. Boss, who's that? Wei Jie couldn't help but ask. Ever since Xiao Hu appeared, Yi Zichen had been acting especially confident. It was obvious he had someone backing him. Now that Zhao Qianhe appeared, he was absolutely certain this was Yi Zichen's trump card. If even Tiger Lei admitted defeat, Wei Jie couldn't help but want to know her identity. I'm not sure. Yi Zichen shrugged. The only reason he was confident in front of Tiger Lei was because he had the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Even if Tiger Lei wanted to kill them, he could bring them all to the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. He really didn't know who this woman was. If it's not convenient for you to say, then forget it. Wei Jie shrugged. He was already completely certain this woman was Boss Ye's backer. It was just inconvenient for her to say it. However, now that he knew such a powerful figure stood behind upheaval, Wei Jie felt more confident. Yi Zichen couldn't be bothered to explain things to Wei Jie. He frowned at Zhao Qianhe, but at that moment, Xiao Hu suddenly spoke up. Kid, if you know what's good for you, you'll release my disciple. Why? I already said I'm going to kill them to honor their souls, said Yi Zichen. He'd had a bellyful of pent-up anger at Zhao Qianhe, but now a nobody like Yi Zichen dare provoke him? Xiao Hu felt like exploding. All right, I'm standing right here. Kill them for me to see. No problem. Yi Zichen didn't hesitate at all. A long sword suddenly appeared in his hand. The blade flashed, and Xiao Zhan's head fell to the ground. Blood spurted out 1/2 meter into the air. Even as his head fell to the ground, his eyes were filled with confusion. Perhaps even as he died, he was wondering why his master had come, but he'd still died. The onlookers froze. Their minds had already gone blank. All they could see was the spurting blood and the head falling to the ground. Chapter 1161. Enmity. Xiao Zhan rolled to Chen Chenghe and the other's feet, his eyes still open. When they saw Xiao Zhan's eyes, the experts of the Divine Mountains retreated in terror, afraid of being dragged into this calamity. After doing all of this, Yi Zichen carefully wiped the blood off his blade, then gazed calmly at Xiao Hu in the sky. He'd killed Xiao Zhan with his own hands, but his emotions didn't change in the slightest. In fact, when he sensed Xiao Hu's fiery gaze, he tossed his sword in front of Chen Chenghe and the others. Do what you have to do. He was obviously trying to coerce them into carrying out their previous decision, but the situation was different now. Above their heads, Tiger Xiao Hu was staring at them with his eyes. Telling them to kill the Xiao family's intersect disciples now was no different from asking them to die. My patience is limited. I'll give you 3 breaths of time to consider. If you don't act now, I can guarantee that you'll die right here and now. Yi Zichen glanced coolly at Chen Chenghe and the others. 1. Even Zhao Qianhe was taken aback by his actions. Although she had always been very domineering when she spoke, she would not intentionally oppose Xiao Hu if she could avoid angering him. No matter what, Xiao Hu was the 3rd elder of the Lightning Emperor's punishment hall. He'd once shaken the God realm and struck terror into the Yao's hearts. Whether it was in terms of his faction's background or his own strength, he was the kind of person you shouldn't provoke if you could avoid it. But Yi Zichen wasn't just doing that. He was provoking Xiao Hu in the worst possible way. He was like a moth flying into a flame, completely pushing himself to the opposite side of the Xiao family. 2. Yi Zichen's countdown was meticulous. When Chen Qinghe and the others saw his sharp gaze, they felt as if they were sitting on pins and needles. At this moment, the cold-looking youth was severely injured by a Xiao who grabbed the longsword. As the Divine Mountains experts watched in terror and Yi Zichen's group watched, he silently walked up to the Xiao family's inner sect disciples. Impudent! Xiao who was in the sky, could no longer remain calm in the face of this incessant provocation. A thunderous roar exploded in everyone's ears. The rolling thunder tore the sky apart, and his right foot stepped out from a shattered sky. A beautiful figure suddenly appeared in front of him and blocked his way. Xiao Hu sniffed the delicate fragrance in the air and shouted angrily as he looked forward with a livid face. "Zhao Qianhe, are you determined to go against me? I wouldn't dare, but this is our northern Divine Mountains territory. As someone from the Sea of Innocence, there's no way I'm going to let you do as you please right under my nose." Zhao Qianhe closed the green umbrella in her hand, and a grave expression appeared on her charming face. She stared into Xiao Hu's eyes, completely sealing off his path of retreat. Yi Zichen's oppressive ruler aura completely locked onto Xiao Hu. As it locked onto him, Xiao Hu clenched and unclenched his fist several times. At the same time, Yi Zichen urged him on. 3. Suddenly, a black figure flashed by. Next, they saw Chen Qinghe holding a longsword. Drops of blood dripped from the edge of the blade and dripped to the ground. Beside him, the young man's Jian phone was in the same state. In front of the two of them, the two inner disciples of the Xiao family had fallen to the ground. Their eyes were filled with terror as their heads rolled to the ground. Boom! In an instant, the rumbling of thunder in the sky became even more violent. One could feel Xiao Hu's towering rage from the thunder. Zhao Qianhe spread her divine power out, not daring to relax in the slightest. Suddenly, the enraged Xiao Hu completely retracted his aura. His gaze passed through Zhao Qianhe's petite frame and landed on Yi Zichen and the others. Very good. I, Xiao Hu, will remember this grudge on behalf of the Xiao family. Longevity Sword Sect, Yellow Wind Sect, and School of Imperial Beasts. I'll remember them too. The disciples of the Longevity Sword Sect and Yellow Wind Sect lowered their heads, their hearts filled with terror. With that, Xiao Hu's gaze landed on Zhao Qianhe, who stood across from him. Zhao Qianhe, the Lightning Emperor's Xiao family's debt with your Sea of Innocence will be settled in the future. I, Xiao Hu, will say this. This matter isn't over. Then I'll represent the Sea of Innocence and await your arrival, said Zhao Qianhe. Humph! With a furious snort, Xiao Hu, who'd shattered the heavens, suddenly disappeared from everyone's line of sight. After he disappeared, the doomsday-like sky gradually returned to its original state. However, after Xiao Hu left, Chen Qinghe and the Yellow Wind Sect disciples couldn't relax. Just now, Xiao Hu had mentioned their gang by name. Presumably, once he returned to his clan, he wouldn't let them off the hook. After doing all this, Chen Qinghe panted heavily. His chest heaved up and down violently, and his eyes stared blankly at his hands. The youth's expression didn't change in the slightest. After Xiao Hu left, he viciously stabbed his sword into the ground, then turned to Yi Zichen and cupped his hands. I've already followed your instructions and killed Xiao Hu's disciples right in front of him. Is that right? Can you let my fellow disciples return to the sect? Of course. I'm a man of my word. You're all safe now, but... His gaze fell on the Yellow Wind Sect disciples. Since Yi Zichen had killed Xiao Zhan, there was now one less survivor. When the two female disciples from the Yellow Wind Sect noticed their gazes, they revealed terrified expressions. Their senior brother Huang furrowed his brows and reached out with his right hand towards the sword on the ground. Sword light flashed, and Gao Xiong's group's heads were separated from their necks. Chiron Fei was also among them. In order to plan this, he'd racked his brains. He'd sowed discord between Gao Ruilong and Gao Ruilong, causing their most likely successor to die. Then, he'd plotted Gao Ruilong's death and framed upheaval. Everything had gone according to his plan. He thought he could use this opportunity to get revenge for what happened at the 100 Daybreaks Inn and the humiliation of the Wu family breaking off their engagement. He never would have guessed that things would turn out like this. After killing Gao Xiong and the others, senior brother Huang tossed his sword to the ground and knelt on one knee. At the same time, he ripped off his spatial ring and held it high above his head. "Please, Your Excellency, let's go." Senior brother Huang knelt on the ground, soaked in sweat. Yi Zichen glanced at him coolly. Just as he was about to take the ring, he noticed that it flew into the sky. Chapter 1162. Impression of Zhao Qianhe. The scene of Zhao Qianhe suppressing Xiao Hu was still vivid in his mind. If she hadn't appeared, Xiao Hu wouldn't have left so anticlimactic. The surrounding people instinctively made way for him. Yi Zichen sensed that he was coming his way, so he greeted him as a junior. "Thank you for your help, senior." Zhao Qianhe walked up to Yi Zichen, who was bowing to her. She didn't say anything for a long time. She naturally didn't act as if she'd spoken to Xiao Hu. She was a ruler. Even if Xiao Hu had affected the Northern Divine Mountain, she wouldn't have been the one to communicate with him. Her appearance was completely at the behest of others. Before coming here, she'd always been curious about Yi Zichen. She also wanted to see for herself what the man who'd entrusted her with this task, a man who'd practically praised to the heavens, was really like. However, when she saw it for herself, her impression of Yi Zichen wasn't particularly good. Perverse. Arrogant. He was clearly not even a prime, yet he dared to provoke the Thunder Emperor's clan, which had been established in the god race for tens of thousands of years. He was completely irresponsible for his own actions and acted on his own whims. No fear in his heart. He looked down on everything. There was no subtlety to speak of. In short, in Zhao Qianhe's eyes, there was nothing special about this person. On the other hand, what she saw were countless character flaws that she couldn't look straight at. It was hard to imagine that if it wasn't for her, this arrogant young man might not even be able to survive. She couldn't understand how such a person could receive such a high evaluation from that person. Zhao Qianhe shook her head indifferently and didn't even look at him. She turned to Qin Chenghe and the others. Longevity Sword Sect, Yellow Wind Sect, Beast Governing Sect. Senior. Everyone on the Divine Mountain bowed. Zhao Qianhe spoke again. "When Xiao Hu returns, he will definitely cause trouble for all three of you. How about this? When you go back, tell your sect master that if he doesn't mind, the Northern Divine Mountain Sea of Innocence is willing to take you in." The people of the Divine Mountains have been panicking over how to face their sects, but when they heard Zhao Qianhe's offer, they all lit up with hope. The Xiao family was the Thunder Emperor's family, and they were extremely powerful. If such a force bore a grudge against them, their sects would never be able to rise again. They might even become abandoned pawns left behind to preserve their sections. But if they could attach themselves to the Northern Divine Mountain Sea of Innocence, that would be a completely different situation. The Sea of Innocence was a power that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the Lightning Emperor's family. With the Sea of Innocence's protection, even the Lightning Emperor's family would have no choice but to suffer in silence. However, even if they remembered this grudge, they couldn't truly destroy their sect. As for them, who might become the abandoned pawns of the sect, they might even be able to become the heroes who helped the sect establish such a powerful backer. We will definitely explain it to the sect leader when we return to the sect. Qin Chenghe and the others nodded. Yes. Nodding calmly, Zhao Qianhe turned to leave as well. The lower lands of the Divine Mountains were left for those below the Supremes to live in. Existences like her couldn't stay here for too long. Just as she was about to return to the Divine Mountains, Yi Zichen called out to her from behind. "Senior, please wait." Zhao Qianhe turned around indifferently, then looked at Yi Zichen with an indescribable expression. "Senior, please return those 2 rings to me. They belong to me, of course." She unfolded the rings, looked at them, then glanced at Yi Zichen's serious expression. Only then did she say her first words to him. "They belong to you." "That's right." Yi Zichen's expression was solemn. "My friend gave me those rings in exchange for their safety. They belong to me, of course. Without me, how could you possibly talk about safety?" Besides, I wasted quite a bit of my time taking action. If I don't even get those 2 rings, wouldn't that be a bit of a loss? Said Zhao Qianhe. Senior, you must be joking. You've gained far more than I have. In response to Zhao Qianhe's question, Yi Zichen pressed his lips into a smile. You've gained the support of the Longevity Sword sect, the Yellow Wind sect, and the School of Imperial Beasts. I'm sure these 3 aren't small factions on the Divine Mountains. With the addition of these 3 factions, the Sea of Innocence's overall strength will rise to a whole new level. After receiving so many benefits, can you really say you didn't get anything at all? The onlookers were shocked beyond belief. It was just 2 rings. The resources contained inside were most likely limited. Yet Yi Zichen was haggling with someone who defeated even Xiao Hu just because of those 2 rings. They really didn't know whether to say he was extraordinarily courageous or that there was something wrong with his brain. Even senior brother Huang of the Yellow Wind sect wanted Yi Zichen to shut up. If worse came to worst, he'd just send him 2 more rings. Otherwise, if that senior took advantage of the rings and even found the Yellow Wind sect an eyesore, wouldn't that be a huge loss? Especially when it came to the thoughts of powerful seniors, it was hard to fathom. Yi Zichen couldn't deny the possibility of that happening. When she heard Yi Zichen's eloquent argument, Zhao Qianhe smiled calmly and tossed the rings to him. Yi Zichen caught the rings and bowed, but Zhao Qianhe had already turned around and disappeared from everyone's sight. However, before she left, she'd already had a terrible impression of Yi Zichen. Now, she'd added 2 new flaws to his image. Greed, sophistry. Yi Zichen naturally had no idea of this, and he couldn't be bothered to care about what Zhao Qianhe thought of him. Even though he had an enormous amount of resources on hand, compared to the major factions of the God Realm, it wasn't even worth mentioning. Even if the rings the Yellow Wind sect had given him didn't contain many resources, he couldn't just throw them away like that. Besides, given Zhao Qianhe's status, she didn't have much use for them. He might as well give them to Yi Zichen, so he could use them on his blade. Yi Zichen naturally handed the ring back to the chief steward, Jiao Qi. At the same time, he glanced at the corpses strewn across the courtyard and gestured for Upheaval's members to clean them up. At the same time, he turned to the cultivators from the Divine Mountains. I won't keep you any longer. Go back to wherever you came from. Then we won't impose on you any longer. If you have the chance, Brother Yi, please come visit our Eternal Sword sect. Chen Xinghe cupped his hands respectfully, then left with his 2 fellow disciples. And the Yellow Wind sect. The members of the Yellow Wind sect disappeared as well. As for the members of the School of Imperial Beasts, the other 2 wanted to greet them politely, but they'd never spoken to Yi Zichen in the first place. The cold-faced youth who'd killed the Xiao family members didn't seem to be good with words either. He simply cupped his hands in greeting, then disappeared as well. After taking care of everything with great difficulty, Yi Zichen felt an inexplicable wave of exhaustion wash over him. He seemed unyielding and arrogant, but this was all based on his calculations. Exhausted, he left everything to Wei Jie, then returned to the room the gang had prepared for him to rest. However, as soon as he pushed open the door. Chapter 1163. Chapter 1163. Su Yun's return. When Yi Zichen entered his room, he heard a soft voice. That familiar tone made him raise his head abruptly. He kept looking around the room, but what he saw was an empty room. Yi Zichen laughed self-mockingly, then shook his head and chucked his jacket onto the clothes rack beside the bed. I'm hearing things again. Ever since the war with the demons, Yi Zichen would often hear things like that in the dead of night. Su Yun, or Xia Kiki. Yi Zichen walked to the window and took out some wine from his ring and placed it on the windowsill. Yi Zichen leaned against the windowsill and poured the wine into his mouth, while he couldn't help but think back to the past. If I didn't join that group, would things be different now? He had really asked himself this question countless times. If he hadn't entered that group in the Heavenly Court, would his current life have been a different possibility? Su Yin and Xia Kiki were still the goddesses in his heart, and the people in his dorm were still his brothers. After graduating from university, they would go their separate ways and go about their own business. After a few years, a letter would bring them back together, and they would talk about their experiences in the past few years. Although that kind of life was boring, it was much more satisfying than his current life of scheming, and walking on the edge of a knife. What? You like to lament now that you're so old. This doesn't seem like you. At that moment, another sentence appeared in the room. Yi Zichen turned around abruptly when he heard that. He was now completely certain that he wasn't hearing things. There really was someone in his room. Behind him, there was indeed a young man with a smile on his face. The young man wore a purplish-black robe, had a bald head, and a string of Buddhist beads around his neck. Yi Zichen's entire body froze the moment he saw the young man. The wine jug in his hand slipped out of his hand, but the young man in front of him reached out and caught it. Bro, what's wrong? Is it Parkinson's? You can't even hold a jug of wine. With that, the young man poured a mouthful of wine into the jug's mouth. Yi Zichen's gaze continuously changed. After a few breaths of time, he snatched the jug over. You're already a monk, yet you still drink. You're breaking your precepts. I don't care about wine and meat. The young man grabbed the wine pot and poured the rest of the wine into his mouth. After the young man drank all the wine in the wine pot, he let out a carefree burp and placed the wine pot on the windowsill. The smile on his face was withdrawn as he laughed in a somewhat deep tone. Are you doing okay? His greeting made Yi Zichen's nose twitch inexplicably, but he quickly laughed and punched the youth's shoulder. Sui Yun, you brat. She wanted to laugh, but as she laughed, her eyes reddened uncontrollably. Yi Zichen silently lowered his head, supported his eyes with his hands, and looked out the window without saying anything for a long time. 100 years. He blamed himself for half a year. For the past half year, Yi Zichen had been tormented. Images of that day haunted his mind. After arriving in the God Realm, he'd used countless methods to track down Sui Yun and the others. He tried to find any news of their existence. No one knew what he was shouldering, nor did anyone ask him to take responsibility for anything. However, the pressure he'd exerted on himself was so heavy he couldn't breathe. But now, Sui Yun stood before him once more. That feeling, it was truly difficult to put into words. Sui Yun stood silently behind him. He knew that Yi Zichen had to adjust to this situation on his own. Little did he know, on the Divine Mountains, under Zhao Qin's pressure, Xiao Hu, who'd returned to the central Divine Mountain clan in a fit of rage, radiated a murderous aura from head to toe. When his clansmen saw him, they greeted him from afar. After returning to the clan, he made a beeline for Xiao Yan's courtyard. When he arrived, he saw that Xiao Yan had placed 2 cups of fragrant tea on a round table. The tea was still steaming. It was obvious that he just poured it out. Sit. Xiao Yan smiled warmly at the overbearing Xiao Hu and gestured for him to sit across from him. Clan head. As soon as he sat down, Xiao Hu opened his mouth to speak, but Xiao Yan stopped him. He pointed at the tea. Have some tea. Xiao Hu was already impatient, but he was facing the clan head. He couldn't disobey him. He could only drink all the tea in the cup in one gulp. After putting down the teacup, he hurriedly said, Clan leader, I already know. Xiao Yan smiled and gestured for him to stop. Xiao Hu furrowed his brows. Clan head, you already know? Didn't they just kill the 3 inner sect disciples we sent? The Longevity Sword sect, Yellow Wind sect, and School of Imperial Beasts were among them. Since you already know, then why? What else could I do? Xiao Yan glanced at Xiao Hu coolly. Just now, the Northern Divine Mountain Sea of Innocence released news that the Longevity Sword sect, Yellow Wind sect, and School of Imperial Beasts have become their subordinate factions. In half a day, the Sea of Innocence will send emissaries to oversee those 3 factions. It's the Sea of Innocence again. Xiao Hu clenched his fists, then furrowed his brows. Clan head, the Sea of Innocence is deliberately causing trouble for our Xiao family. Are we just going to endure it? So long as you give the order, I'll immediately lead my men and storm the Sea of Innocence. Xiao Hu, you're an elder of our clan. In terms of seniority, even I have to call you uncle. There's no need to doubt your strength, and the title of Tiger Lightning is the greatest reward for you. I don't doubt that you're strong enough to storm the Sea of Innocence, but sometimes not everything has to be resolved by force. Xiao Yan glanced at Xiao Hu, then pointed at the teacup in front of him. Do you know why I told you to drink that cup of tea? I wanted you to calm down. No matter how you look at it, the Sea of Innocence is one of the strongest factions in the God realm. Storming it clearly isn't realistic. Besides, the situation has been rather delicate lately. It's better to avoid unnecessary trouble. Xiao Hu was a martial artist with a fiery temper. He'd already had a belly full of anger from Zhao Qianhe. Now that he'd let a junior, who hadn't even reached the supreme level, provoke him like this, he felt like he was about to explode. Despite Xiao Yan's words, he still found it difficult to quell his anger. However, he had to give face to the clan head. Since he'd said not to provoke the Sea of Innocence, he had no choice but to drop the matter. Then I'll listen to you, clan head. With that, Xiao Hu prepared to leave. However, Xiao Yan called out to him. Chapter 1164. The painted wall, that's enough. As far as I know, you're not that pretentious. When he saw Yi Zichen standing by the window in silence, Su Ian couldn't help but joke behind his back. When he heard this, Yi Zichen turned around. He'd long since suppressed the sourness in his nose, but his eyes were still a little red. Yi Zichen rolled his eyes, then punched Su Iyun. You're right. You're overthinking things. But what's going on with you? How did you end up a monk? That's a long story. Su Iyun rubbed his bald head, then smiled and explained everything that had happened over the past few years. From Su Iyun's explanation, Yi Zichen learned that when he'd activated the formation, his soul had indeed fused with it. Only when Yi Zichen's divine tribulation shattered the formation did his soul scatter and scatter, along with the formation. His consciousness also disintegrated. However, when he woke up, he found himself lying on a bed. Before long, a tender-looking youth appeared in his room. Yi Zichen accepted him as his disciple, and from then on, he lived in the youth's palace. Only after a dozen years did he learn that youth was Emperor Hades. So you're Emperor Hades' disciple now? Yi Zichen's eyes were filled with astonishment. Emperor Hades was in existence on the same level as the God Emperor, Yao Emperor, and Demon Emperor. Su Iyun was his disciple, and Yi Zichen was Su Iyun's brother. From now on, he could do whatever he wanted in the God realm. Sort of. When he saw Yi Zichen's astonished expression, Su Iyun nodded. However, Yi Zichen wasn't particularly satisfied with his answer. He frowned. What do you mean by sort of? Yes means yes, and no means no. What do you mean by sort? I can't be sure either. Su Iyun shrugged. Although I'm Emperor Hades' disciple, he's never taught me anything in all these years. But if I had to say no, we really do refer to each other as master and disciple, and we're the only two people in the palace. Aren't you his disciple? As for not teaching you martial arts, that's a bit of a shame. But as long as you're Emperor Hades' master and disciple, that's enough. When he thought about how he now had such a powerful backer, Yi Zichen's confidence soared. If anyone dared to provoke him again, he'd just shove Su Iyun up in front of them and announce that he was Emperor Hades' disciple. What? You're not Hades' palace, but you're here now? What? What? Are you going to follow me from now on? I'm right. Let me tell you. Brother, there's nothing. Although for you, I'm not. I's bas is. You as I you is, long as I sue. He as he could he as he spr, king. He as he as he as he can li I yes he from. Why does your master want to see me? Emperor Hades had specifically said he wanted to see him. No matter how arrogant Yi Zichen was, he didn't dare put on airs in front of an existence of that level. After Su Iyun told him the news, the two of them didn't delay at all. They hurried from Ice Blue City to Emperor Hades' palace in the River Styx. As soon as they entered the River Styx, Yi Zichen couldn't help but feel his heart skip a beat. In just half a minute, they'd already sensed the auras of at least 10 supreme-level savage beasts heading their way. Their eyes were filled with ferocity. If it weren't for the medallion in Su Iyun's hand, the savage beasts would have torn them apart long ago. We're here. An hour later, Su Iyun and Yi Zichen reached the bottom of the valley and stopped outside a temporary palace. When they landed, Yi Zichen instinctively looked it up and down. In the end, his gaze landed on the black demon dragon's eyes. "Don't look." Su Yun immediately tried to stop him, but to his surprise, Yi Zichen didn't notice anything amiss at all. "What's wrong?" Yi Zichen looked at him in bewilderment. When he saw that Yi Zichen was fine, Su Yun couldn't help but frown. "You don't feel any discomfort?" "How could I feel discomfort?" Yi Zichen was speechless. That shouldn't be the case. The Celestial Sand Hound Divine Generals had been heavily injured when they looked into the black demon dragon's eyes. If Emperor Hades hadn't intervened, they might have sustained serious injuries. Emperor Hades had told him that even ordinary rulers would fall into a daze if they looked into the black demon dragon's eyes. Anyone below the diviner level would find it hard to escape death. Yi Zichen hadn't even reached the Earth Supreme level yet, but after looking into the black demon dragon's eyes, he was completely fine. This bro of his was no ordinary person. "Why are you looking at me like that? Didn't you say Emperor Hades was looking for me? Let's hurry inside." Under Su Yun's strange gaze, Yi Zichen felt uncomfortable and couldn't help but speak up. As soon as he spoke, the palace's doors opened on their own, and a deep rumble echoed out from within. "Come on in." Surprisingly, the doors didn't lead straight ahead. Instead, they opened up a staircase that led downwards. The staircase was so deep that they couldn't see the end. Both sides of the staircase were pitch black. Yi Zichen and Su Yun felt their way down, but after descending for who knew how many steps. On both sides of the wall, a row of wall fires ignited. The flames illuminated the pitch-black hallway, and Yi Zichen saw that the walls were covered in countless diagrams. What made him feel strange was that when he looked at these patterns, he actually felt that they were more or less familiar. When he saw the last diagram, he immediately turned to look at Su Yun. "What is it?" Su Yun asked in confusion. Yi Zichen pointed at the wall. "Look at this painting." "Huh? There's no painting?" Su Yun arched his brows in surprise and looked at the wall. In his eyes, there were no diagrams at all. "This is clearly..." Yi Zichen wanted to explain, but he swallowed his words halfway. After so many years of experience, he'd already realized that he was the only one who could see the diagrams. No one else could see them at all. What made him uneasy was that the last painting he'd seen was a depiction of his battle against the demons. Yi Zichen connected it to the previous diagrams, and he couldn't help but guess that this hallway's walls recorded the cycle of reincarnation. The diagrams he'd seen earlier. Chapter 1165. Meeting Emperor Hades. This was Yi Zichen's cycle of reincarnation. In order to confirm his suspicions, Yi Zichen returned to the first lit spot on the stairs. He placed his hand on the wall and looked at the patterns on it, as well as the words. 2717 BC, 2599 BC, Yellow Emperor Xianyuan. 1105 BC, 1045 BC, King Xian. 795 BC, 771 BC, King Yuezhou. Ingzheng, Lu Bu, Li Shimin, Zhao Kuangyin, and Zhang Sanfeng. The walls clearly recorded their births and deaths, as well as all the major events that had transpired while they were still alive. Their lovers, their lives, and their deaths. At the end of the stairs, they saw Yi Zichen, 9 lives. This was clearly a record of Yi Zichen's 9 lives of reincarnation. Yi Zichen couldn't close his mouth in shock. He stared blankly at the walls, at the records, unsure of what to say. "If you finished reading, come on over." Suddenly, the scene inside the hall changed. The stairs Yi Zichen and Su Yun had taken earlier suddenly disappeared. They were now standing in the center of the hall. At the very front of the hall stood a youth in black robes. He held an ancient tome in his hands and slowly flipped through it. "Master!" The bald Su Yun immediately bowed to the youth. Yi Zichen, despite his shock, bowed as well. "Junior Yi Zichen greets Your Excellency Emperor Hades." The youth closed the tome and set it to the side. Only then did Yi Zichen notice that there was a small bookshelf to the youth's left. The bookshelf was filled with bamboo slips and scrolls. At the same time, the youth looked over. Yi Zichen finally saw Emperor Hades' face clearly. He was too young. Emperor Hades' face was as young as a teenager's. This was completely different from the Emperor Hades Yi Zichen had imagined. However, Emperor Hades's gaze was as deep as the sea, as if it could pierce through time itself. Under his gaze, Yi Zichen felt as if he had no secrets at all. He was standing before him, completely naked. "Iyun, you can leave. I want to have a good chat with your friend." After a brief moment of staring, Emperor Hades spoke. Su Iyun, who was waiting in the hall, nodded and cupped his hands. "Then this disciple will wait outside." Yi Zichen turned around and left the great hall. As he left, Yi Zichen shot him a meaningful glance. He didn't know Ming Di at all. It was already strange enough that Ming Di was looking for him, but now he wanted to talk to him alone. Although Yi Zichen had seen quite a bit of the world, he couldn't help but feel a bit nervous when facing such a powerful existence alone. Yi Zichen. After Su Iyun left, Emperor Hades said his first words to Yi Zichen. She simply called out his name and did not say anything else. Even so, the pressure on Yi Zichen increased exponentially. After taking a few deep breaths, he cupped his hands and replied, "Junior is here, Your Excellency Emperor Hades. Why did you purposely bring me here and use such a troublesome method to send Su Iyun to find me? What does Your Excellency Emperor Hades want to talk to me about?" Given Emperor Hades' status, if he wanted to see Yi Zichen, he didn't need to go through all that trouble. Also, when I came in earlier, the patterns on the walls seemed to be related to my reincarnation. Yes, I asked Ian about it on the way here, but he couldn't see the patterns. In other words, Your Excellency Emperor Hades wanted me to see them on purpose. Of course. I don't understand. Yi Zichen cupped his hands, then looked up and waited for Emperor Hades to explain. What does that have to do with me? Emperor Hades flatly refused. Yi Zichen was certain he didn't understand. Anyone else would have been at a loss after what he'd just gone through. There was no problem with him seeking an explanation, but he'd forgotten. He was nothing more than a nobody who hadn't even reached the supreme level. No matter how well he'd done in the lower lands, he was currently sitting across from Emperor Hades, who was on par with the God Emperor. In the face of such an existence, he was nothing. Just because he didn't understand didn't mean Emperor Hades had to explain. Such a resolute response made Yi Zichen's hands tremble involuntarily. Emperor Hades's resolute response reminded him that his status wasn't equal to Emperor Hades's. Yi Zichen silently lowered his head. Emperor Hades glanced at him a few times, then casually pulled out a scroll. "In truth, I've been keeping an eye on you for a long time. As for that long, I'm afraid you'll have to trace it all the way back to your first life, the Yellow Emperor." Emperor Hades's tone was calm, and he didn't try to exert any of the authority he usually did in front of others. Despite himself, Yi Zichen's heart trembled, but when he thought back to the time he'd seen his record on the wall of reincarnation, he knew that Emperor Hades was telling the truth. Without waiting for him to speak, Emperor Hades placed the scroll on the table, then tossed the other scrolls onto the table in front of Yi Zichen. "These scrolls all record your cycles of reincarnation. The stories of your reincarnation are quite interesting. Whenever I have nothing better to do, I'll take a look and pass the time. Of course, I'm only telling you this to let you know that I've been keeping an eye on you." A faint smile surfaced on Emperor Hades's face. Sensing it, Yi Zichen spoke up. "Thank you for your concern, Senior, but what exactly is it about this junior that's worthy of your attention?" Emperor Hades chuckled, but didn't answer Yi Zichen's question. It seemed that Emperor Hades wouldn't answer any of his questions. Yi Zichen didn't want to embarrass himself, so he just shut up and let Emperor Hades speak. "There are some things you shouldn't know, so it's best if you don't ask. I'm getting old, and I'm starting to talk too much. I almost forgot why I called you here. Let me ask you this. Do you know the Five Elements Great Emperor?" Why was he suddenly bringing up the Five Elements Great Emperor? Yi Zichen inexplicably furrowed his brows. Given Emperor Hades' status, there was definitely a reason he was asking this question. Furthermore, he had no way of confirming Emperor Hades' relationship with the Five Elements Great Emperor, nor did he know his relationship with the God Emperor. This junior has heard of him. It would be a lie to say he didn't know, but if he said he did, the Five Elements Great Emperor had died tens of thousands of years ago, and the God Emperor had sealed off all information about him. Saying he'd heard of him was the safest answer. You've only heard of him? It's that simple? To Yi Zichen's surprise, Emperor Hades laughed inexplicably. He hooked his right hand at Yi Zichen, and he sensed a strange fluctuation from his spatial ring. Before long, the Yao ceiling pagoda flew out. The pitch-black pagoda flew towards Ming Di and landed in his hand. At the same time, Ming Di spoke. Chapter 1166. A period of decay. Yao ceiling pagoda. As he watched the pagoda fly away, Yi Zichen's back instantly became drenched in cold sweat. His heart tightened when he heard Emperor Ming's question. He tried his best to calm himself down, but his heart wouldn't listen to him. It was thumping nonstop. The entire hall was so quiet that he could hear his heartbeat clearly. This is something I obtained by chance. Yi Zichen suppressed the shock in his heart, then clenched his teeth and lied. But at this moment, Emperor Ming's face darkened. His eyes narrowed into slits, and a sinister aura emanated from the entire hall. Speak the truth. Junior, Yi Zichen wanted to explain, but found that under this pressure, he couldn't continue lying. This Yao ceiling pagoda was personally refined by me, and the 5 elements view it as a treasure. You say you obtained it by chance? Do you think this emperor can believe these words? Tell this emperor the truth. You've been to his mausoleum, right? Yes. Why didn't you say so earlier? As he spoke, Emperor Hades retracted his divine pressure and tossed the Yao ceiling pagoda back into Yi Zichen's hands. Take good care of the Yao ceiling pagoda. There are many who covet it in the 3 realms. Even the sorcerer tribe values him greatly. As he held the Yao ceiling pagoda and listened to Emperor Hades' words, Yi Zichen was certain that Emperor Hades' relationship with the 5 elements great emperor was deep. What's so important about this Yao ceiling pagoda? Do you really not know, or are you pretending not to know? The key to the tomb of the purple myrtle divine emperor all those years ago wasn't worth those old fogies risking their lives to fight over. And the last floor of the Yao ceiling pagoda. Do you know who's imprisoned there? Who? Why should I tell you? To his surprise, Emperor Hades laughed and shrugged, then looked at Yi Zichen teasingly. Yi Zichen was the last person he wanted to deal with this sort of person. Since he didn't want to say it, then he couldn't be bothered to ask. As if sensing Yi Zichen's helplessness, Emperor Hades spoke up. In any case, this Yao ceiling pagoda is much more precious than you think. You're lucky to have it. Treasure it. Junior understands. But that's not why I brought you here, said Ming Di. Come forward. Inside Ming Di's palace, Ming Di naturally held the absolute authority. Even if Yi Zichen was unwilling, he could only obediently walk over. Emperor Hades rose to his feet, but to his surprise, he only came up to Yi Zichen's shoulder. He couldn't help but frown. His right hand slapped Yi Zichen's shoulder, forcing him down half a meter. Yi Zichen watched as Emperor Hades' left palm slammed into his forehead. The forehead was a cultivator's most important position. Yi Zichen instinctively tried to dodge, but Emperor Hades didn't give him a chance. His right hand clamped down on Yi Zichen like a pair of iron pincers, preventing him from moving, then pressed his left palm against Yi Zichen's forehead. When Emperor Hades' hand touched Yi Zichen's forehead, his body flashed with a purplish-black light. The light flowed through his palm and into Yi Zichen's forehead. Then, Emperor Hades pushed Yi Zichen back onto a prayer mat he'd prepared beforehand. Emperor Hades' legs buckled, and he almost fell to the ground. Master! Su Hyun, who had been waiting outside the palace, had actually been observing the situation inside the palace the entire time. When Emperor Hades almost fell to the ground, Su Hyun immediately ran to his side and helped him sit down. Emperor Hades' face was drenched in sweat. His pitch-black eyes were lifeless, and his lips were pale. Master, are you all right? Emperor Hades calmly waved his hand to indicate that he was fine, but after resting for an hour, he finally spoke. From now on, I'll be going into seclusion. If anyone comes by, tell them I've gone on a long journey. Master, Su Hyun started to speak but stopped. Emperor Hades saw this and didn't bother hiding it. Yes, my cultivation technique has already entered a period of decline. No cultivation technique was perfect. Even Emperor Hades' cultivation technique was no exception. Once he cultivated his cultivation technique to a certain level, it would begin to decline. Right now, he was wearing his youthful appearance because his cultivation technique was in a period of decline. Not only would this decline cause his body to return to its childhood state, but it would also greatly reduce his strength. When the sandhounds had come, he'd used the fog to conceal himself because he didn't want them to witness his decline with their own eyes. But Master, didn't you say that you could suppress it for at least another 100 years? Su Iyun frowned. Emperor Hades absolutely couldn't return to his childhood state. The Yao south of the river Styx were eyeing them like tigers stalking their prey. They needed Emperor Hades to intimidate them. I could have suppressed it for a few more years, but I've given this kid too much source energy, so I can't suppress the decline any longer. In just a few breaths' time, Emperor Hades' body had already undergone an obvious transformation. Whether it was his face or his body, they were constantly shrinking. Now, he looked like a 6 or 7-year-old child. You have to pay close attention to the Yao's movements. Although I tried to intimidate them a while ago, those old geezers won't give up so easily. My intimidation will only delay their attack, but it won't be able to stop them completely. The river Styx is the first and last line of defense to stop the Yao from attacking the human race. I'll give you a medallion. As he spoke, Emperor Hades took out 3 medallions and placed them in Su Iyun's hands. This purplish-black medallion belongs to the Lord of the River Styx. If the Yao dare cross the River Styx, use this medallion to gather all the beasts and souls in the River Styx to defend it. Your disciple understands. Emperor Hades held the medallion in his hand, then handed him a golden medallion. And these 2 medallions. If the beasts in the River Styx are unable to stop the Yao's attack, use these medallions to find Bai in the Divine Mountain's 4-direction palace. Tell him, ask him to repay the favor he owed Emperor Hades all those years ago. He definitely won't refuse. Your disciple understands. And this medallion. By now, Emperor Hades had shrunk to the size of a 4-year-old child. He couldn't even pick up the light blue medallion. Chapter 1167. Supreme Ascension inside the palace. Emperor Hades' body continued to shrink. Su Iyun held the 3 medallions in his hand, committing Emperor Hades' words to memory. Master, is there anything else you need to tell me? I've pretty much told you everything I need to. I'll leave the rest to you. With that, Emperor Hades glared at Yi Zichen, sighed, then transformed into a cloud of mist and disappeared from the palace. Su Iyun bowed deeply to Emperor Hades' departing figure, clenched the medallions tightly, and looked at Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen seemed to have entered a meditative state. He sat motionlessly on his prayer mat. After staring at him for a long while, Su Iyun furrowed his brows, put the remaining 2 medallions into his spatial ring, and walked out of the palace with the black medallion in hand. No matter what Yi Zichen's current situation was, he was absolutely safe within Emperor Hades' secondary palace. His master, Emperor Hades, was in seclusion during his waning years. Right now, his first priority was to contact the vicious beasts of the River Styx and strengthen its defenses. Little did he know, not long after he left, Yi Zichen sat cross-legged on the ground, his body glowing with 5-colored light. 5 beams of light surrounded him, reflecting the great Tao of the 5 elements. Within Yi Zichen's sea of consciousness, his soul clone sat cross-legged in the center of his chaotic sea of consciousness. Just now, when Emperor Hades' palm pressed against his forehead, a torrent of information had drilled its way into his soul clone. Yi Zichen had no way of digesting the boundless soul power, so he'd been doing his best to absorb the information Emperor Hades had given him. After sorting through the information, Yi Zichen discovered that the disorganized information was actually all about his comprehension of the Tao of the 5 elements. Of course, this wasn't to say that Emperor Hades also cultivated the Tao of the 5 elements. Rather, at their level, they more or less dabbled in any great Tao. His understanding of the Tao of the 5 elements naturally couldn't compare to the 5 elements' great emperors, but for someone like Yi Zichen, who hadn't even reached initial success, it was more than enough. Yi Zichen's understanding of the five elements was reflected in his soul. It was as if a brand new door had been opened to his understanding. This kind of direct inheritance was even more direct than the five elements Great Emperor's five elements Dao steals in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Emperor Hades' relationship with the five elements Great Emperor is definitely not shallow. Within his sea of consciousness, Yi Zichen couldn't help but knit his brows. Different people had different understandings of the Great Tao. That's why it was said that the 3,000 Great Taos had 3,000 paths. However, Emperor Hades' understanding of the Great Tao of the five elements and the five elements Great Emperor's understanding of the Great Tao of the five elements were complementary. As for the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, he had personally forged it for the five elements Great Emperor. From the looks of it, the relationship between the two great emperors was worth pondering. In the time it took to finish a cup of tea, Yi Zichen's understanding of the Tao of the five elements rose to new heights. One by one, the shackles that had plagued him for so long were broken. Wind, rain, thunder, lightning, fire. Shockingly, the five elements appeared above Yi Zichen's head. Wind, rain, thunder, lightning, and fire. When the five elemental laws merged in the hall, the immortal spiritual energy in his body was completely transformed into the power of God. Boom! In the void of space outside the God clan, a golden longsword tore through the void and arrived. The appearance of the golden light attracted the attention of countless powerhouses in the God clan. The God Emperor, the Lightning Emperor, and even the four-direction palaces Swan and I were attracted by the golden sword. However, what shocked the powerhouses was that they couldn't lock onto the direction of the golden sword. The golden long sword tore through the void, piercing through the heavens as it headed straight for Emperor Hades' palace. When it appeared in the air above Emperor Hades' secondary palace, it simply circled around it a few times, then let out a cheerful cry. It pierced through the palace's restrictions, landed on Yi Zichen's head, and burrowed into his sea of consciousness. A godhead. When he saw the golden longsword, Yi Zichen instinctively frowned. He was certain this wasn't the same godhead from before. His previous godhead was much smaller than this one. Furthermore, the sword spirit, Xianyuan Xiang, had already merged with it. More importantly, this godhead's appearance hadn't triggered any lightning tribulation. As Yi Zichen furrowed his brows, the godhead flew towards him, circled around him, and let out joyful cries. Although he didn't understand why he had two godheads, Yi Zichen reached out and touched the blade, then fused it with his soul. Buzz! The immortal spiritual energy in his body transformed into divine power. When it flowed through his 8 extraordinary meridians, he became a supreme. Little did he know, outside Emperor Hades' palace, the North Star in the 9 heavens flashed with light. A golden decree emerged from the Emperor's star and floated in the air. The moment the decree appeared, the minister of the left beside him also shone brightly. If anyone was paying attention to the Milky Way, they'd see a scholarly man tens of thousands of feet tall emerge from the minister of the left. The man accepted the decree. A golden brush suddenly appeared in his hand, and he wrote a single word at the very top of the golden decree. Yi. After he finished writing, the golden brush in his hand disappeared. At the same time, he placed the decree beside the Emperor's star. The Emperor's star glowed brightly, and the decree disappeared once more. As for the man who'd written it, his body turned illusory and disappeared into the minister of the left. Back in Emperor Hades' palace, Yi Zichen was still oblivious to the changes his body had undergone after becoming a supreme. At that moment, Su Yun, who'd just finished talking to the higher-ups in the river Styx, returned to his palace. When he saw that Yi Zichen had woken up and sensed the change in his aura, he couldn't help but laugh. Congratulations on breaking through. Congratulations, congratulations. Where's Emperor Hades now? I'll have to thank him for helping me break through. Achieving minor mastery of all 5 elements at once had troubled Yi Zichen for quite some time. He'd only become a supreme so quickly because of Emperor Hades' help. When he mentioned Emperor Hades, Su Yun's expression darkened. Yi Zichen sensed the change in his expression and couldn't help but ask, "What is it?" He couldn't tell anyone that Emperor Hades was in a state of decline, but when he considered Yi Zichen's relationship with him, as well as the fact that Emperor Hades had spared no effort in helping him break through, he decided not to hide it from him. Master is currently in a state of decline. He doesn't even have a tenth of his strength left, so he has to go into seclusion. A state of decline? Yi Zichen furrowed his brows. I can't explain it to you in such a short time, but before Master goes into seclusion, he asked me to tell you something. What is it? Next, Su Yin took out a light blue command medallion and placed it in Yi Zichen's hands. Chapter 1168. Nine-Tailed Fox, Nine-Tailed Heavenly Fox Clan? Yi Zichen froze. If he wanted the Nine-Tailed Fox Clan, didn't that mean he'd see Su Yin? Su Yin knew what he was thinking and nodded. It's the tribe that my little sister is in. But when you get there, don't forget about the important matters. I'm afraid Master wants you to go directly to the mortal world after you go there. The sword spirit of the Xianyuan sword has already awakened. The divine race, demon race, and demon race have all sent people down to fight for it. Su Yun said this with a smile. He knew the relationship between Yi Zichen and Su Yin. However, Yi Zichen couldn't bring himself to laugh. He was so happy that he forgot his duties. What he was afraid of was that once he got there, whether or not Su Yin would see him was a mystery. Back then, he had hurt her deeply. Who do you think I am? I know how to take care of the big picture. Since time was of the essence, I wouldn't waste any more time here. I'd head straight to the Nine-Tailed Fox Clan. By the way, are you coming with me, or? I won't go over. Master is in seclusion, so I need to take charge of the river Styx. I'll wait here for your good news. All right. He channeled his divine power into the light blue token in his hand. When it did, the token glowed faintly, and a blue door appeared in Hades' palace. Yi Zichen walked inside, then cupped his hands towards Su Yun. Then let's part ways here. Farewell. Su Yun chuckled. Then Yi Zichen disappeared through the door. When the hall returned to silence, Su Yun, who was still brimming with a smile, suddenly withdrew his smile. He held the other two tokens in his hands and spoke with a grave expression. Master, I'm afraid that your seclusion will not only make the people of the demon race active, but even the old fellows of our netherworld river will also move. The Nine-Tailed Fox Clan. In ancient times, they were a peak race that had fought together with the Myrtle Imperial Star's divine master to defend against the demon race's attack, causing great damage to the race's vitality. Even after hundreds of thousands of years, this race had yet to recover even half of its peak. Even so, the current nine-tailed heavenly demon still had a transcendent status in the demon race, but it was no longer as glorious as it had been during the primordial divine master era. The Fox Clan's back mountain was already part of the heavenly nine-tailed Fox Clan's territory. Those who lived here were the purest members of the Fox Clan, as well as the young foxes of the Fox Clan. This was the safest place in the Fox Clan. It was difficult for outsiders to enter this place. But today they caught an intruder. A person was tied to the trunk of an ancient, towering tree in the back mountains. This was none other than Yi Zichen, who'd entered the Nine-Tailed Fox Clan through the medallion. His appearance startled the little foxes playing in the back of the mountain. Before he could explain, the little foxes ran over and tied him up. These little foxes weren't even Yao Kings yet. Given Yi Zichen's strength, dealing with them was too easy. However, he was here on a mission, so there was no need for him to get angry with these kids. Hey, it's a misunderstanding, I'm here to see your clan head. I have absolutely no ill intentions towards you, said Yi Zichen helplessly. There were at least 30 immature little foxes standing in front of him. They'd all taken human form, but they looked no more than 7 or 8 years old. The little foxes had all taken human form, but they looked no more than 7 or 8 years old. If you're looking for the clan head, why didn't you go through the main entrance? Why did you sneak into our back mountains? It's all a misunderstanding, said Yi Zichen. He didn't know how to explain. His eyes darted around a few times, then he laughed. Hey, it's like this. I know Su Lua. She should be here, right? Go find her. She'll prove her innocence. You know Big Sister Lua? One of the little foxes, who looked like a porcelain doll, pouted, blinked her big eyes, and asked in a surprised, childish voice. However, to his surprise, a nearby boy pulled her back and snorted. Don't listen to him. Big Sister Lu has a pure nine-tailed fox bloodline. Who in the entire Yao race doesn't know her? Besides, Big Sister Lu isn't here right now. Who can prove he knows her? We'd better notify the guards and detain him for now. Don't. I'm not a bad person. Why are you detaining me? Yi Zichen glared at the boy, then continued. If Su Lu isn't here, then Su Yan is. I know her too. Big Sister Su Yan? Why should we believe you? She should be in the clan right now, right? Just find her, and everything will be fine. If I'm lying to you, you could detain me then, right? In any case, I can't run away even if you tie me up. Then, just you wait. In a quiet, secluded courtyard of the Fox clan, a fairy-like woman sat in front of a stone table, quietly embroidering. At this moment, the sound of footsteps could be heard from outside the courtyard. The woman in front of the stone table placed the embroidery on the table. Not long after, she saw a little girl about 7 or 8 years old running in from outside with a red face. Shower, what's wrong? The woman in front of the table reached out her hand and touched the little girl's head. The little girl blinked and said, Big Sister Su Yan, someone suddenly appeared behind us, and we caught him. But he says he knows you, so Lil Gang told me to come take a look. He knows me? The pretty woman smiled. All right, then I'll go take a look. Meanwhile, on the nine-tailed Fox clan's back mountains, Yi Zichen was tied to a tree trunk. His heart pounded violently. Before long, he might see Su Yan again. It had been so many years since they'd last met. He wondered if she was doing well. As his heart trembled, the childlike boy crossed his arms and snorted. I'm telling you, if Big Sister Su Yan doesn't know you, you're in for it. You trespassed on our nine-tailed Fox clan's back mountains. Even the Yao Emperor can't protect you. Oh, not even the Yao Emperor? Your clan is so strong. What do you think? The boy wrinkled his nose arrogantly. At that moment, 2 figures appeared behind the little foxes. Big Sister Su Yan is here. One of the little foxes called out, but the boy immediately turned and ran over. Yi Zichen lowered his head and clenched his fists. Big Sister Su Yan, that guy says he knows you. The little boy pointed at Yi Zichen, who was tied to the tree. The woman nodded, then walked towards the ancient tree, stopped about 10 meters away from Yi Zichen, and spoke softly. Excuse me, you are. Her familiar voice and tone made Yi Zichen's heart tremble violently. When the woman saw him tremble, she couldn't help but frown. When he looked up, she heard him say, Chapter 1169. Meeting the Fox clan head. As soon as Yi Zichen spoke, the surrounding air seemed to freeze. When the Fox kids heard his words, they trembled. At the same time, Su Yan froze. How could it be him? Su Yan repeated the same words over and over again in her mind. As the two of them stared at each other in silence, the little boy spoke up. Big Sister Su Yan, do you know him? I don't. Suddenly, Su Yan's expression grew cold. She stared intently at Yi Zichen, who was tied to the tree. Her gaze wavered, and she clenched her fists. This person trespassed on the nine-tailed Fox clan's back mountain. He's most likely a spy sent by an outsider. Little Gang, notify the 3 halls and detain him. When the clan head comes out of seclusion, he'll deal with him. After explaining everything, Su Yan left without so much as a backward glance. However, the instant she turned around, everyone saw her shoulders tremble. Su Yan seemed to be laughing and crying at the same time. She didn't stop until she'd left the back mountain. She gazed at the towering tree binding Yi Zichen. I used 8 seconds to hate you, 8 minutes to leave you, 8 hours to throw away everything related to you, 8 months to let you go, and 8 years to forget you. But then you said, are you all right? All of my memories came back to me. Huh, why? I said I'd hate you for the rest of my life, but I'll never forgive you. But you're still alive. That's great. The hot tears in her eyes flowed down like a broken dam. Su Yan sighed nonstop, her tears glistening as they drifted away. The adult-like boy frowned at Su Yan's departing figure, then at Yi Zichen's astonished expression. In the end, His expression turned into one of bitterness, but in the end, he could only scratch his head. In the end, he was still too young. He couldn't understand the story behind all of this. Big sister Su Yin said she doesn't know you. What do you have to say for yourself? The boy wrinkled his nose and frowned. Yi Zichen, who was tied to the tree, pursed his lips and smiled, but did not try to defend himself. I don't. Yi Zichen barged into the nine-tailed Fox clan's back mountain. As expected, he landed in the dungeon. Sniffing the damp air around him, he recalled Su Yan's attitude towards him back then. Yi Zichen shook his head with a faint smile, then sat down on the cell's bed and poured wine into his mouth. Half a day passed. Yi Zichen just sat there, looking up at the only window through which the sun shone, and continued to drink. Rumble. At this moment, the door to the dungeon opened, and a tall, cold, and arrogant woman walked in. The woman walked right up to Yi Zichen's cell and instinctively covered her nose with a frown. Why does it reek of alcohol? When Yi Zichen heard the newcomer's words, he put down his wine gourd and glanced at the cell door. When he saw the woman, he couldn't help but purse his lips into a smile. Sister Luer, long time no see. It really is you. When Su Luer saw that the person in the cell was Yi Zichen, she didn't seem surprised at all. Rather, she seemed to think it was only natural. As soon as I returned to the clan, I heard that someone had barged into the back mountain. He even said that he knew me and my sister. Just now, when I went to see my sister, she stammered and stammered, as if she'd been crying not too long ago. After thinking it over, I figured it had to be you. After 100 years, Su Luer had grown even colder and more arrogant. Her every word and action seemed inhumane. She'd long since disliked Su Yin and Yi Zichen. It was only after their experiences that her impression of Yi Zichen had changed slightly. But now, Su Yin seemed to be deeply opposed to Yi Zichen. She naturally wouldn't try to get them back together. I heard from those kids that you're here to see the head of the nine-tailed Fox clan. Coincidentally, the clan head just emerged from seclusion. I'll take you to him now. Yi Zichen broke the prison seal and opened the door, then stepped out of his cell and said, "What's wrong with you?" "Thank you, Sister Luer. It's no trouble at all. Although I've never liked you, I understand you a little. Since you said you had business with the clan head, it naturally wasn't a lie. I don't want my little sister's stubbornness to delay your business." Su Luer glanced at him coolly, then walked out of the dungeon. Yi Zichen sighed inexplicably. He swallowed the words he'd wanted to say, then silently followed her out. Su Luer led Yi Zichen to a bamboo forest. It was impossible to tell how old the 1-inch-wide bamboos were, and they towered into the sky with no end in sight. The layout of the bamboo forest was even more peculiar. Countless paths crisscrossed one another. If one wasn't careful, they'd get lost in the forest. Yi Zichen didn't know how many twists and turns they'd taken, but by the time Su Luer led him out of the bamboo forest, he saw a steaming hot spring. Beside the spring stood a bamboo building. Anyone, Su Luer, who'd been leading the way, suddenly stopped and bowed towards the hot spring. Only then did Yi Zichen notice that, beneath the steam, there was a woman with her back to him. Her back was as white as snow and as smooth as a pearl. With just a glance, Yi Zichen felt his heart tremble. He hurriedly averted his gaze, not daring to profane her in the slightest. "She's here." The woman's voice was gentle. Yi Zichen heard a voice in the water, and before long, the woman spoke again. "Come over here." The woman had already put on her clothes and was sitting at a table by the side of the spring. Su Luer and Yi Zichen walked up to the woman, stopped about 5 meters away, and cupped their hands in greeting. Yi Zichen greets the clan head. The woman looked Yi Zichen up and down, then nodded at Su Luer. "Luer, you can leave for now." Su Luer disappeared into the bamboo forest without any hesitation. The beautiful woman pointed to the seat across from her. "Sit." The Fox clan truly lived up to their reputation as the Yao race's most handsome men and beautiful women. They were the most handsome of all Yao. The Fox clan's clan leader in front of him was an existence that was extremely beautiful. What's more, she wasn't just beautiful. She was also one of the strongest existences in all of the upper 3 realms. As he sat across from her, Yi Zichen felt somewhat ill at ease. Did Emperor Hades send you? After a long silence, or rather, after sizing him up for a long time, the nine-tailed Fox Clan's clan leader finally spoke. Chapter 1170. Chapter 1170. Getting close, why should I? The Fox Clan head laughed disdainfully, her eyes flashing with faint resentment. Back then, I, Su Wan, prostrated myself and begged Emperor Hades to find the 5 elements souls in the river of time. But he locked himself away for 3 months, and now he's begging me. Why should I help him? Yi Zichen hadn't guessed the Fox Clan head and Emperor Hades had such a past. When he heard this, his heart sank. Wasn't Emperor Hades trying to screw him over? Even if it were him, he definitely wouldn't help her. So that's how it is. Emperor Hades is too inhuman. Yi Zichen changed the subject and spoke on Su Wan's behalf. What was Emperor Hades thinking? How could he shamelessly ask me to beg you? If he'd asked me directly, there'd be no way I'd come here and embarrass myself like this. Yi Zichen slapped his thigh, his gaze brimming with disdain for Emperor Hades. Yi Zichen wasn't putting on an act. This was absolutely his honest opinion. There was nothing fake about it. If Emperor Hades had helped her back then, that would have been fine. But if he hadn't, he'd shamelessly come begging for help. How shameful. Child, you're quite a sensible person. Su Wan nodded in satisfaction. Emperor Hades had rejected her all these years, and she'd always remembered it. Although she didn't hold a grudge against him, there was no way they'd ever cross paths again. They'd just be strangers. That's for sure. I'm absolutely a sensible person. He thumped his chest. In that case, you should go. This time, it was Su Wan's turn to slam on the brakes. Yi Zichen was stunned. Indeed, he didn't think much of Emperor Hades' behavior, but he had to go back to the lower 3 realms. Forget visiting his old friends. He had to get the Xin Yuan sword back. Aside from a 9-tailed Fox Clan, he had no idea how to get back to the lower 3 realms. Yi Zichen's smile stiffened. He rubbed his nose, his eyes darting back and forth. Any Wan this? Su Wan couldn't help but knit her brows when he called her Aunt Wan. Hey, Big Sister Lu, called you Annie Wan, right? Su Lu's my big sister, so it's not too much for me to call you Annie Wan, right? Huh. Yi Zichen's smile was as dry as it could be. Even Su Wan couldn't help but grin at his blatant attempt to curry favor with her. She quietly waited for his performance. Emperor Hades' actions are too cowardly, really. No man could have done such a thing, and I could not agree with him. But Aunt Wan, look, I'm innocent. Su Wan smiled and nodded, still quietly watching his performance. You see, if you really can't do it, you can help me out and let me go down. Now that you put it that way, it does seem to make some sense. Su Wan smiled and nodded. Yi Zichen's eyes lit up, but suddenly, Su Wan's expression darkened. Scram. Before I get angry, hurry up and disappear from my sight. Wan, do you want me to attack you? Yi Zichen licked his lips and blinked. Then, with a coy smile, he stood up from the table and left. Not long later, he returned. You're not leaving? Su Wan frowned. Hey, don't get angry. Yi Zichen smiled viciously, then pointed at the bamboo forest outside. Can you arrange someone for me? This. I can't get out. Su Wan glanced at him coolly, then waved her right hand. The bamboo forest disappeared, transforming into a plain. He hadn't guessed that the bamboo forest was actually a magical artifact. Yi Zichen arched his brows, then nodded and bowed to Su Wan, then vanished like a wisp of smoke. It seems those old fogies really are right. Emperor Hades has entered a period of decline. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come looking for me for something as trivial as opening the door. But why should I help you, even if you and I were once close friends? Even if we were once best friends, we've already broken up since you refused to let me in. Yi Zichen silently rose to his feet and was just about to return to his residence when a beautiful figure stepped out of the bamboo forest. Lil, Yen, why are you here? Have you made any progress with the Dharma body I taught you? Not yet, replied Su Yin timidly. When Su Wan saw this, she couldn't help but say, Lillian, you have a pure 9-tailed fox bloodline running through your veins. Not even your older sister can compare to your bloodline's purity. You're already in 9th stage Sky Supreme. Once you break through to the diviner level, you'll need to awaken your bloodline. You can't delay your Dharma body any longer. Understand. Su Yin pursed her lips and nodded, then fiddled with the hem of her clothes. Noticing her anxiety, Suwon looked at her and said, "Is something on your mind? Ewan, why did Yizichin come here just now?" Su Yin blinked, then fiddled with her clothes. Emperor Hades sent me to open a door to the lower realms for him. I presume he wants him to retrieve the Xianyuan sword. Quite a few people from the upper three realms have already gone down. But what obligation do I have to help him? I just refused. So that's how it is. When she heard this, Su Yan's frown deepened, and she fiddled with her clothes even more fiercely. After a long time, Su Yan, who had her head lowered, took a few deep breaths and raised her head to look at Suwon. "Antwan, I'd like to ask a favor of you." The Nine-Tailed Fox clan's hospitality truly wasn't very friendly. Yizichin ran out of the bamboo forest, only to find a fully armored white fox waiting for him with a shield and sword in hand. He didn't even say a single word before tossing Yizichin out of the Nine-Tailed Fox clan. Yizichin stood in front of the Nine-Tailed Fox clan's main gate, tilted his head, and looked in their direction. Tossing him out was one thing, but couldn't they send him back to the river Styx? He was in the wilderness, unfamiliar with the place and the people. How was he supposed to get back to human territory? Wah, Emperor Hades definitely screwed me over. Yizichin clenched the blue command medallion. It seemed to be a one-time use item. Just now, when he tried to use it to return to the river Styx, nothing happened. What was he supposed to do? Cross the out territory? No way. This won't do. I have to go back and talk to the clan head. After a moment's hesitation, Yizichin decided to go back to the Nine-Tailed Fox clan. Otherwise, he'd really be stuck in the wilderness until he died. At that moment, a white fox guard suddenly appeared in the void above. When he looked closely, he saw that it was the same one he'd tossed out. "Hey, bro." Yizichin stood on the ground and waved at him. He mulled over whether he should negotiate with the guard to take him back, then talk to the clan head. When the white fox saw him, it descended from the sky, walked up to him expressionlessly, took out a jade slip, and tossed it to him. Chapter 1171. Chapter 1171. The passage of time after leaving the jade slip behind. The white fox guard transformed into a beam of light and returned to the Nine-Tailed Fox clan's mountains. Yizichin could clearly sense the power contained within the jade slip. Boundless divine power flowed through the jade slip. Yizichin was certain that so long as he released its power, he'd definitely be able to open a path to the lower realms. "You were so mean earlier. Why did you suddenly agree?" Yizichin couldn't help but frown as he looked at the jade slip. However, obtaining it was already a good thing. There was nothing to worry about. As for the warning Suwon had given Emperor Hades, Emperor Hades was in a state of decline. Who knew when he'd emerge from seclusion? Yizichin couldn't be bothered with their personal grudges. Right now, all he cared about was returning to the lower three realms. Whenever he thought of his homeland, Yizichin's heart thumped violently. That place could be considered as his second homeland. There, he battled demons with wits and courage. Countless scenes of what he had lost and what he had obtained flashed through his mind like fleeting lights and shadows, and they interweave in his mind to form memories that he would never be able to erase. "I really wonder how you're doing?" After muttering to himself, Yizichin's very soul trembled. He clenched the jade slip, unable to resist the urge to go back, even though he'd only been gone for a few years. Who wouldn't miss home? Without any hesitation, Yizichin crushed the jade slip between his fingers. Surging divine power gushed out from the jade slip. Countless divine powers interweaved in the air, forming a shocking phenomenon of heaven and earth. In the blink of an eye, the divine power gathered in front of Yizichin. About half a meter in front of him, the divine power coalesced into a faint blue crystal formation. His feet stepped towards the Dharma array, and the foundation stone of the Dharma array shone brightly. Suddenly, it transformed into a beam of golden light that pierced through the heavens. Deep in the bamboo forest behind the Nine-Tailed Fox clan, Suwon glanced at it indifferently when she sensed the beam of golden light. Only when the light disappeared did she retract her careless gaze. Her fingers lightly tapped on the surface of the square table, and her red lips parted slightly. "Luer, come see me." In the blink of an eye, the stars shifted. When Yi Zichen disappeared from the Yao realm, he didn't reappear in the lower three realms. Instead, he stopped in a long, pitch-black corridor. At this moment, he was standing at the end of a long corridor, and behind him was the empty sea of stars. "What's the situation?" When he arrived, Yi Zichen was a bit dumbfounded. He stepped out of the sea of stars, and when he stepped into the starry sky, he discovered that everything here had returned to chaos. That jet-black corridor with no end in sight was the only building here. Yi Zichen didn't quite understand what was going on, so he circled the starry sky a few times. What frightened him was that even though he had memorized the direction, he was completely lost in the sea of stars when he walked 100 meters out. Just as he was panicking, the pitch-black corridor appeared in front of him again. Clearly, there was something strange about this corridor. In other words, this might be the only way to return to the lower realm. After a moment's hesitation, Yi Zichen gave up on wandering aimlessly through the Milky Way. He really was worried about getting lost here. He stepped into the corridor again. This corridor was about 2 meters wide, and its height was about the same. The corridor was clearly pitch black, but its interior was incomparably bright. What on earth is this? Don't tell me everyone else came down like this too? Yi Zichen had no idea how long he'd been walking in the corridor. All he knew was that it seemed endless. No matter how he walked, he couldn't find his way out. Gradually, he began to grow anxious. When he tried to turn around, a ball of fire suddenly lit up behind him. The light from the fire shone on the mirror-like walls, turning the entire corridor into a fiery red color. More importantly, Yi Zichen could feel the heat of the flames as he stood with his back to them. Through the surrounding walls, he seemed to be able to see someone behind the flames. He suddenly turned around, and sure enough, he saw a bonfire about half a meter in front of him. The flames blazed so fiercely that their tongues almost touched his face. There was a black-robed man sitting beside the fire. He looked like a sorcerer, but it was impossible to tell whether he was male or female. He sat beside the flames and reached out, as if warming himself. Just as Yi Zichen recovered from his astonishment, the sorcerer suddenly looked up. However, he wasn't looking at Yi Zichen, but rather at the spot opposite him. The sorcerer spoke in a voice as hoarse as an old crow's. "Welcome to the time corridor. Are you talking to me?" Yi Zichen asked in surprise, but to his surprise, the sorcerer completely ignored him. The sorcerer continued to stare at the spot opposite him. A moment later, Yi Zichen saw a figure stealthily approach from the depths of the flames. The figure's owner caused Yi Zichen's entire body to stiffen, as if he'd been petrified. Far away, outside the time corridor, in Maple City, outside the immortal region, I heard that the demons who stayed here all those years ago were killed by that statue. In the air above Maple City, several dark-skinned men in revealing clothing looked contemptuously at Yi Zichen's statue in the center of the city. "That's right, Your Excellency." A human youth stood beside the demons. He wore green robes, and judging from the fluctuations of spiritual energy he emanated, he'd already reached the immortal king level. In the immortal region, this sort of strength would make him a peak existence. There was no need for him to bow and scrape to anyone. However, the people standing beside him were different. These people, they were all supremes. In front of supremes, even an immortal king like the youth had to tuck his tail between his legs. He smiled apologetically. Back then, it was precisely this statue's living being who prevented you from entering. However, he's already dead, but the faction he left behind is in Maple City. If not for, by end of the Four Directions Palace interfering and preventing us from descending, this place would have long since become our territory, snorted one of the demon supremes. He grinned at his brothers and said, "Coincidentally, the divine artifact hasn't appeared yet. How about we stay here and have some fun? That's not too good, is it? The gods and Yao are here too, if we act rashly." Chapter 1172. Welcome. You're the commander of this expedition. Everything is up to you. The demon who tried to dissuade him stopped trying. He shrugged and handed over all authority to the arrogant demon sovereign. Cain, I hate it when you're so boring. The commander frowned at the demon, but at that moment, they heard an angry shout in front of them. Who are you? You can't fly in Maple City. The one who'd shouted was a sky immortal expert. Judging from his attire, he belonged to Leisure House. He walked over with furrowed brows, but just as he was about to scold them, the demons. This sky immortal had experienced the great war against the demons all those years ago, so he had a deep impression of them. With just a glance, he was able to tell that they were from the devil race. Just as he was about to turn around and report, the devil race's commander pointed at him. A bloody hole appeared in the sky immortal's back. With a loud crash, he fell from the city and slammed into the ground. At the same time, the demon general smashed the statue erected in Maple City. Your Excellency, there's movement from the divine artifact. Please hurry over, lest the Yao and gods seize the initiative. Just as they were having fun, one of the demons suddenly called out to the commander. The demon commander furrowed his brows. He'd just been about to have a little fun, but now the divine artifact was making a move. This was a huge disappointment. However, he couldn't afford to make any mistakes with the divine artifact. Otherwise, he wouldn't have a good ending once he returned. Jackdaw, we should hurry over. If we delay official business, the demon emperor won't let us off so easily. Cain frowned at the demon commander, only to see him shrug disappointedly. Got it, but I'm really interested in their ley line. It's just a lower plane, but the people here cultivate at the same speed as the higher realms. How about this, you? Jackdaw pointed at the immortal king youth. The youth immediately scurried over in terror, only to hear Jackdaw's voice. I am very interested in your dragon vein. If you can help me snatch the dragon vein, I can give you a great opportunity. Of course, I will also provide you with some help. Later, I will send someone to give you 3,000 demon king-level demon warriors for you to use. I only want the dragon's vein. As for the rest, you can make your own arrangements. Demon King, I wonder if the level of a demon king is he's the immortal king here. The immortal king, young man shuddered. With 3,000 immortal king experts under his command, let alone seizing the dragon vein, it was more than enough for him to conquer this place. Although it was somewhat despicable to associate with the demon race, the winner was the king, and the loser was the thief, what devil race or not. This lowly one understands. Without the slightest hesitation, the youth knelt before Jackdaw. Don't disappoint me. Jackdaw nodded calmly, then turned to his companions. Leave 3,000 demon kings for him. The rest of you, follow me to the land of the divine artifact. Don't let the celestial race and the fey race take the initiative. The demons coveted the dragon vein, and the ambition of the youth caused the immortal domain to fall into a crisis. Yi Zichen, who was still in the time corridor, was in the midst of a terrifying nightmare. Yi Zichen stared fixedly at the man standing across from the bonfire. The man wore golden imperial robes. As he walked, the air around him seemed to undulate, and even the blazing flames lowered their heads, as if bowing to him. The God Emperor who presided over the 9 divine mountains. After inheriting the 5 elements' great emperor's dying wish, he'd fantasized about meeting the God Emperor countless times. However, he never would have guessed it would all happen so quickly, so suddenly. More importantly, they were so close to each other. There was only a bonfire between them. So long as Yi Zichen reached out, he could touch the man's clothes. Yi Zichen's heart raced, so fast that he almost couldn't breathe. His nerves were taut, and he didn't dare meet the man's gaze. He carefully lowered his head. You're quite lucky to be able to enter the time corridor. I can grant you one wish, but you should know that I'm no philanthropist. You'll have to give me something in return. The wizard in front of the bonfire spoke. The God Emperor frowned slightly. I want all of the 5 elements' great emperor's celestial fate. Fine, but you'll have to pay the corresponding price. I'll give you my heart. With practically no hesitation, the God Emperor plucked his heart out. As he dug it out, blood spurted out, but when it splashed onto Yi Zichen, it vanished. When Yi Zichen saw that his clothes weren't stained with any blood, he instinctively reached out. His hand passed through. This is an image. As Yi Zichen watched in astonishment, The god emperor presented his heart to the warlock. The heart he'd pulled out was still beating vigorously. The warlock glanced at it indifferently, then tossed it into the bonfire. The bonfire burned even brighter. It's a fair trade. I'm satisfied. If you leave the time corridor now, you'll appear before the Emperor Star has even appeared. I trust one don't need to tell you how to seize celestial fate. The god emperor really did leave without another word. Yi Zichen sighed in amazement. What the Five Elements Great Emperor had said in the landscape painting was true. The god emperor really had seized his celestial fate, and he'd done it this way, at the cost of his heart. Didn't it mean the current god emperor didn't have a heart? Before Yi Zichen could digest all of this, another person approached from the other side of the bonfire. When he saw who it was, Yi Zichen's expression grew strange. It was none other than the Five Elements Great Emperor. Welcome to the Time Corridor. The warlock said the same thing to the Five Elements Great Emperor. As soon as the Great Emperor appeared, he looked him up and down. I want to know what Zhou Wu asked for just now. Yi Zichen was dumbfounded. The Five Elements Great Emperor actually knew the God Emperor had come here. Right now, the most important thing was the warlock's answer. What do you want in exchange? Cough. The Five Elements Great Emperor wasted no time. He ripped off his right hand and tossed it into the bonfire. Is that enough? It's a fair trade. Just now, Zhou Wu asked me how to seize your celestial fate. He said it. The warlock actually said it. This warlock was up to something, wasn't he? Given his abilities, he definitely knew this was the Five Elements Great Emperor. As expected, to Yi Zichen's surprise, the Five Elements Great Emperor didn't seem surprised in the slightest. On the contrary, he seemed rather calm. He staggered out of the time corridor. Yi Zichen didn't know why, but as he watched, his heart ached. He knew the God Emperor had stolen his celestial fate, but there was nothing he could do to stop him. This could really be a very sad thing. Just as Yi Zichen sighed at how fate toyed with him, the warlock looked at him. Chapter 1173. Chapter 1173. Demon in front of the bonfire. The warlock wore an enormous hat. Illuminated by the flames, Yi Zichen could vaguely make out a pair of bewitching eyes. When he spoke just now, he sounded like a clown. His voice was extremely thin and high-pitched. Yi Zichen, who was preoccupied with his own thoughts, trembled in fright at the warlock's words. He looked in the direction of the warlock in astonishment. When he noticed the warlock's gaze, he pointed at himself and took a few steps back. Are you talking to me? That's right, kid. I'm talking to you. This familiar tone made Yi Zichen involuntarily think of the planes in the Alliance. The way this warlock spoke, his tone, and his tone were exactly the same. Of course, that wasn't the main point. What he cared about was this old warlock. Was he really real? The images he'd seen of the God Emperor and Five Elements Great Emperor were all images that had been preserved here. Even that warlock was an illusory existence. Now, for some inexplicable reason, he'd become a real person. This was rather inconceivable. Are you really talking to me? Yi Zichen instinctively arched his brows, his lips quivering. He crossed his arms and paced around the bonfire, studying the warlock. Yi Zichen reached out and saw that the flames were indeed radiating heat. But this warlock was a bit strange. While the warlock wasn't paying attention, Yi Zichen took off the warlock's hat, revealing his face. A little person. Under the hat was a little man with two small horns on his head. He looked a little deformed. Its head was large, its neck was thin, and its limbs were thin as well. However, its belly was round. Its skin was light blue, and it had no hair. Its eyes took up almost a quarter of its face. My God! Yi Zichen was clearly frightened by this strange thing. He took a sudden step back and blinked repeatedly at the little person. Hey, bro, are you an alien? In a big forest, there were all kinds of birds. Over the years, Yi Zichen had experienced a series of things ordinary people couldn't. But to tell the truth, this was his first time seeing an alien. Little did he know, the alien who'd taken off its hat hung its head and trembled uncontrollably. After a long while, it looked up and revealed a hideous expression. Do you know what you've done? The warlock in front of the bonfire was clearly furious. He glared at Yi Zichen with his ridiculously large eyes filled with rage. You dared to take off my hat, and the Great Pilar was indignant at your folly. Kid, before the Great Pilar gets angry, apologize to the Great Pilar. When he saw how angry the warlock was, Yizichin felt a bit embarrassed. He put his hand to his forehead apologetically. I'm sorry, I'm just curious. I didn't do it on purpose. But you say you're Pilar. Is it your name? Foolish. The warlock put her hands on her hips, pointed a slender finger at Yizichin, and snorted. Pilar is the name of the demons in my kingdom. I am the Great Pilar. You can call me King, or you can call me Mr. Devil. You are very lucky to be able to enter the time corridor when it opened. The Great Pilar can grant you a wish. Of course, you have to pay a corresponding price. Devil? This deformed monster? It had to be said when the warlock explained that Pilar meant demon. Yizichin actually somewhat believed him. As far as he knew, perhaps only demons could grow up to be like this. All right, Mr. Devil. Please forgive my rashness just now. Now, can I tell you my wish? If everything was as Pilar said, and he really could grant his wish, then Yizichin would definitely say, that wish he'd held fast to for 100 years. Of course, no problem, lucky fellow. Hearing Yizichin call him Mr. Devil put the warlock in a good mood. He crossed his arms and smiled in a relaxed manner. Yizichin's heart thumped wildly. Was everything really going to end here? Was the wish he'd worked so hard for 100 years really going to come true in the time corridor? There was a long, drawn-out silence. Yizichin's nervous breathing was clearly audible within the spacious time corridor. The warlock didn't rush him. Instead, he calmly waited for the lucky fellow to say his wish. Mr. Devil, if you really can grant my wish, I'm willing to pay any price. In that case, please tell me your wish, said the warlock in a strange tone. All right. Yizichin took a deep breath, then gulped. Memories of the countless times he'd dreamed of this dream flashed through his mind. I want to turn back time. I want to go back to when I was 19. At first, the warlock thought this would be a difficult wish, but this was the time corridor. For him, reversing time was the simplest. Whether he wanted to go back to the past or enter the future, it was as easy as flipping his hand. Of course, no problem. In that case, please pay the price, said the warlock confidently. The warlock replied confidently. When Yizichin heard his confident reply, his heart raced even more violently. He thought back to the price the God Emperor and 5 elements Great Emperor had paid. A heart and an arm. What price should he pay? Mr. Devil, I don't know much about your market. How about this? What do you think I should pay? Just tell me, and I'll give you everything without hesitation. Well, let me think about it. In all his years, this was the first time he'd encountered such a simple wish. All he had to do was tamper with the flow of time. He couldn't be too embarrassed to ask for too much. Besides, this kid kept calling him Mr. Devil. He didn't have the heart to ask for too much. How about this? After a long pause, the warlock pressed a finger to his forehead and frowned. I want 3 strands of your hair. Just pull them off and toss them into the flames. Yizichin froze. He just wanted 3 strands of his hair? When he'd seen the price the God Emperor and 5 elements Great Emperor had paid, he thought he'd lose an arm or a leg. He never would have guessed he'd only asked for 3 strands of hair. He naturally couldn't pass up on such a good opportunity. He plucked 3 strands of hair and tossed them into the flames. As soon as the strands touched the flames, they blazed even brighter. It's a fair trade. Chapter 1174. You have to compensate me. Is it really that easy to go back? Yizichin stood by the campfire and clenched his fists, waiting for the warlock's answer. If he really returned to his 19-year-old self, Yizichin swore he'd never enter the Red Packet group again. Even if he did, he'd leave it as soon as possible. All of this was like a butterfly effect. His entry into the group directly affected the changes of everyone around him. Of course, this was all based on the premise that he could go back. Thinking about it, the God Emperor could easily take the 5 elements Great Emperor's celestial fate. Compared to the God Emperor's, his wish was far inferior. Given the warlock's strength, he could definitely do it. As he considered this, Yizichin was filled with confidence in the warlock. However, a full hour passed. Yizichin had no idea how many times the warlock had snapped his fingers. After one snap, he snapped another, The cycle repeated itself. Mr. Devil, can I go back now? Previously, the warlock hadn't taken more than a minute to fulfill his wish. However, the warlock had dragged on for a full hour. Yi Zichen couldn't help but frown. The warlock's large eyes darted back and forth in their sockets, but he didn't come to a conclusion. He grimaced in pain, and wrinkles covered his forehead. How strange. Little did he know, as Yi Zichen urged him on, the warlock was muttering to himself. He tried to establish a connection with the time corridor and send Yi Zichen back to when he was 19, but his attempts were like rocks sinking into the ocean. There was no response at all. He'd been in the time corridor for so long, but he'd never encountered anything so strange. What on earth went wrong? The warlock muttered to himself. Yi Zichen, who'd been waiting anxiously outside, spoke up again. Mr. Devil, are you done? Strange, the warlock muttered to himself. He'd tried tens of thousands of times to no avail, so he'd lost his patience. When he thought back to how confident he'd been and how much he'd accepted, the warlock couldn't help but chuckle. Something went wrong, a small problem. The warlock scratched his head in embarrassment. In all his years, he'd never felt so awkward before. What do you mean something went wrong? Yi Zichen's expression was somewhat unfriendly. It's like this. There's a small problem between the time corridor and me, the Great Pilar. I've tried to communicate with him, but I can't get a response. I have no choice but to apologize to you. So you're saying that you can't fulfill my wish. Although this was definitely a huge stain in the life of a sorcerer, he had to admit it. Yes. Yi Zichen laughed. Kid, don't be too disappointed. The warlock walked up to Yi Zichen and put his hands on his hips. Although I wasn't able to fulfill your wish this time, I, the Great Pilar, will remember this humiliation. Once I, the Great Pilar, reconnect with the time corridor, I will find a way to find you and fulfill your wish. The warlock's tone was still as confident as ever. Yi Zichen looked down at the warlock, who barely reached his waist, and slapped him. What are you still playing dumb for? I've realized that my brain hasn't been working well lately. How could I have believed your nonsense? The warlock was small to begin with. Yi Zichen's slap sent him flying into the time corridor's walls. There was a loud bang. How dare you? The warlock slammed into the wall, clutched his head, then pointed at Yi Zichen, eyes spitting fire. You actually dared hit the Great Pilar? When I return to my kingdom, I'll have my people kill you. Ha! In the face of the warlock's threats, Yi Zichen put on an exaggerated expression, reached out, and slapped the warlock's head. The slap sent the wizard flying a few meters away. The wizard was still roaring angrily. He roared indignantly. The Great Pilar won't forgive you. My kingdom. Bang! Yi Zichen was met with another slap. He stuck his hands in his pockets and cocked his head at the warlock. Someone like you has a kingdom? Aya, that really scared me to death. And, the Great Pilar, why are you poor tea? If you were poor tea, you might still have some value. You keep saying, Pilar, and I can satisfy your desires. You say you don't have the ability, so what are you pretending for? The Great. Shut up. Yi Zichen slapped him again. After a few slaps, the warlock didn't make any more noise. However, his expression was still furious. What the F***ck are you talking about? Let me tell you, right now, I'm the greatest. You look like a freak, yet you're still pretending to be human. I almost fell for your lies. Fortunately, I only lost 3 strands of hair. If I lost an arm or a leg, I'd be so mad I'd die. Hey, deformed freak, tell me, are all the people in your world as deformed as you? What race do you belong to? I don't think even the beastmen are as ugly as you. I'm not a freak. I'm a Great Pilar. Call me Mr. Devil. The warlock stomped his feet in anger. He, the Great Pilar, had never suffered such humiliation. His dignity couldn't be trampled on. However, the instant Yi Zichen raised his hand, he cowered. When he saw the warlock's cowardice, Yi Zichen sighed in relief. After a moment's thought, he decided to let it go. He narrowed his eyes at the warlock. Sensing his gaze, the warlock backed away. What are you trying to do? The Great Pilar isn't afraid of you. Don't be nervous. Relax. Yi Zichen looked up. The warlock hurriedly covered his head with his hands and closed his eyes. Before long, however, Yi Zichen merely patted him on the shoulder and smiled warmly at him. I won't hit you again. Don't be afraid. The warlock's expression changed somewhat, and he puffed up his chest disdainfully. The great Pilar's heart never shows fear. All right, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. Yi Zichen smiled and nodded, then patted him on the shoulder. How about this? You see, a deal has to be fair, right? Of course. I gave you 3 strands of hair, but you didn't fulfill my wish. In that case, shouldn't you make it up to me in some way? What kind of compensation do you want? Right now, the Great Pilar can't contact the Time Corridor, but if you can wait, I'll definitely make it up to your satisfaction, replied the warlock. Chapter 1175. Chapter 1175. Demonic Scriptures. Zichen shook his shoulders like a scoundrel, then grabbed the man's hand and reached forward. The warlock backed away uneasily. Yi Zichen's ferocious demeanor made him feel uneasy. He really didn't want to be slapped again. The Great Pilar couldn't tolerate such humiliation. Then what do you want as compensation? The Great Pilar can give you back your hair. As he spoke, the warlock moved to retrieve the strands of hair Yi Zichen had tossed into the bonfire. However, to Yi Zichen, hair was an insignificant price to pay. Just taking back 3 strands of hair would be too much of a loss. Given his personality, he couldn't let go of even the slightest advantage. This was truly unacceptable. Yi Zichen raised his hand and stopped the warlock's movements. He looked him up and down, then looked him up and down timidly. If it's your hair, I don't want it. You don't even have a single strand of hair on your body, so I'll leave it to you. 3 strands of hair won't be a bad idea. Then what do you want? The Great Pilar has nothing to give you, replied the warlock. Then it looks like you want to get beaten up. Yi Zichen's unfriendly gaze landed on the warlock. Instantly, he felt the entire Time Corridor's temperature plummet. Under that gaze, his entire body felt uneasy. His hand groped around under the loose black cloak. When his hand came out of the cloak, there was a pitch-black book in his hand. He reluctantly handed it over. Yi Zichen arched his brows and placed his hand on the book. He wanted to take it back, but was met with resistance. Only then did he realize that the warlock was clenching the book tightly. He was unwilling to hand it over. The warlock's eyes narrowed. He instinctively shook his hand, and the book flew out of his grasp and into Yi Zichen's. Even though it was in Yi Zichen's hands, the warlock stared intently at it, his gaze filled with reluctance. Yi Zichen was rather curious. Just what was so special about the book that it could force the warlock to go this far? Demonic Secret Manual. The pitch-black book was engraved with 4 blood-red words. Yi Zichen flipped open the tome and discovered that it was a manual for condensing a Dharma body. The Supreme Dharma body was the only way to become a Supreme Being expert. What a coincidence! He was just wondering where to find the secret manual for the Supreme Dharma body, and now this shaman had directly given him one. I wonder what rank this evil magic god is. Yi Zichen put the secret tome into his spatial ring, then walked around the warlock a few more times. What do you want? The Great Pilar has already compensated you. The warlock yelled at the top of his lungs, but his anger had no effect on Yi Zichen at all. It merely boosted his courage. Yi Zichen licked his lips, then tilted his head and looked at him. I don't even know how to use that stupid secret manual. What kind of compensation is this? You actually dare to slander the treasures left behind by Lord Devil. You will anger Lord Devil. You will not have a good ending. Scram. Yi Zichen slapped the warlock's head and frowned. Hurry up and compensate me. Otherwise, I'm afraid your life won't belong to you anymore. The Great Pilar has nothing else to offer, replied the warlock sincerely. The warlock replied sincerely, but could Yi Zichen really believe him? He couldn't. Right now, he was playing the role of a bandit. How could a bandit hold back just because his opponent said he had no treasures? There was no way he'd get the warlock to willingly hand over his treasures. It seemed he'd have to take matters into his own hands. Yi Zichen reached out with his left hand and picked the warlock up. His right hand burrowed into his loose black robes and searched around. You're insulting the Great Pilar. Shut up. Yi Zichen frowned and stopped him. He searched around for a long time, but couldn't find his spatial ring. In the end, he simply ripped off the warlock's robes and stripped him naked. He really is that poor. Yi Zichen couldn't help but shake his head when he saw the warlock without so much as a single gold coin on him. The Great Pilar. I will definitely get my revenge. The naked warlock curled up in a corner of the time corridor. He looked like a woman who'd just been violated. His expression was far too easy to misunderstand. Yi Zichen hurriedly tossed the black robes to the warlock, lest the alien stare at him too much. Didn't you say you had a kingdom? How are you so poor? Forget it. I can't be bothered to argue with you. A great man of great virtue will forgive a lowly man like you. Consider that secret tome your compensation. Although I suffered a bit, who told me to be so soft-hearted? Don't you agree? Yi Zichen reached out and tousled the warlock's hair, then put his hands in his pockets and smiled. Get me out of here. If I stay here any longer, I don't know what else I'll do to you. When he recalled Yi Zichen's earlier actions, the warlock couldn't help but shrink back. These memories might become a nightmare for him in the future. He didn't want this demon to stay here for even half a second longer. Yi Zichen snapped his fingers, and a door suddenly opened in the time corridor. Go! The Great Pilar doesn't want to see you here. The warlock pointed at the door and roared. When Yi Zichen saw this, he pursed his lips into a smile, then walked up to the door and waved. Until we meet again. Even as he left, the warlock maintained his furious expression. Soon afterwards, he was suddenly stunned. He looked at the opening door of the time corridor and then looked at his hand. Their connection had been re-established. After leaving the time corridor, Yi Zichen appeared in a beautiful place filled with birdsong and fragrant flowers. This was no longer the primordial chaos beneath the Milky Way, nor was it the pitch-black walls of the time corridor. This place was lush and lush, unlike the upper three realms' ancient trees and jagged rocks. He could faintly hear the cries of birds in the distance. Yi Zichen even saw a squirrel hugging a pine cone and looking at him with an amused expression. This peaceful scene didn't exist in the upper three realms, which were like stagnant water. He knew he'd returned. Compared to the spiritual energy in the lower lands, Yi Zichen discovered that the spiritual energy here was no less sparse. Only the Sky Great District could compare. Yi Zichen knew full well that this was all because of the ley line. He stretched lazily, then swiped his finger through the air. The surrounding space seemed to have lost all its tenacity in front of his fingers, allowing him to draw a crack in it. When he saw this, Yi Zichen hurriedly stopped. As expected, the difference in tenacity between the upper three realms and the lower three realms was like night and day. So long as he willed it, he could destroy this entire world with a wave of his hand. This was a supreme. He gazed off into the distance. Maple City was directly to the north of him. After a while, Yi Zichen suppressed his complicated emotions and smiled. Chapter 1176. Chapter 1176. Yi Zichen's return. After becoming a supreme, Yi Zichen could effortlessly teleport within the three realms. However, he wasn't in such a rush to return. Instead, he took a stroll through the world. This should be the Beast region's territory. After a brief stroll, Yi Zichen was certain he'd landed in the Beast region. Almost instinctively, he arrived at the dragon race's dragon city. He stood in the sky and looked down at every blade of grass and tree. This was where he'd once fought the demons. As far as the eye could see, the scars left behind when he'd used Xianyuan's slash to cleave apart the black dragon were still there. The flattened mountain ranges were exactly the same as they'd been half a year ago. Before long, he arrived at a patch of scorched forest. This was where he'd undergone his tribulation. This was also where Xia Kiki had forcefully broken free from her tribulation in order to protect him. Yi Zichen gently brushed his hand over a tree trunk. After a few sighs, he looked around fondly. He left. He lowered his gaze and shot through the Beast region. Even though he intentionally slowed down, it still took him less than an hour to reach the outskirts of the immortal region's Maple City. Yi Zichen had even more memories of this place. When he'd first set foot in the three realms, he'd landed in a village outside Maple City. He brought the entire village with him to Maple City. He'd met Zuomo, and a series of events had happened there. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say this was his second home. Closer to home, the more timid he felt. Yi Zichen felt that way. He hid in the clouds and looked down at the city beneath his feet. His emotions were complicated. However, strange. The once prosperous and peaceful city had been filled with a solemn aura in the past few days. Everyone walked around in a hurry, and the shops on either side of the street were closed, refusing to entertain customers. Yi Zichen's statue in the center of the city was half destroyed. Although the surrounding rubble had been cleared away, the statue hadn't been repaired. "Oh well, Shui, what do you think we should do now?" A brawny, bare-armed man with thick eyebrows and fierce eyes sat in a chair in front of a stone table. He was tall and sturdy to begin with, so when he sat, he looked like a small mountain. Opposite him was a refined man in a green robe. The man's eyebrows were tightly knitted and his thin lips were tightly pursed. Even if you asked me now, I wouldn't be able to give you an answer. The burly man knitted his brows. He was actually one of the founding members of the Leisure House, Stone. The person opposite him was the current head of the Leisure House, Shui. Now, they were in a rather troublesome situation. What was more serious was that they did not have the ability to end this storm. "Bro, the people from the Immortal region and the Beast region have all arrived." Just as they were frowning in silence, Shuelon walked in wearing a plain dress. Hearing this, Stone and Shui glanced at each other, then got up from their chairs and walked out. "Everyone, sorry for the long wait." When Shui and Rockhead arrived at the front hall, there were already quite a few people standing there. The people in the front hall also cupped their hands towards him. Shui directly walked in front of them and looked at them. "I believe everyone knows the current situation. I wonder if anyone has any good suggestions?" Unexpectedly, everyone in the hall revealed a troubled expression. After a long while, one of the elders from the Beast region spoke up. "If everything is as sect head Shui says, and the events of 100 years ago are about to repeat themselves, then all we can do is stubbornly resist. The ley line is the foundation of the three realms. We can't hand it over to the demons. But that's 1,000 immortal kings." The atmosphere in the hall grew heavy once more. This place could not compare to the upper three realms. Immortal kings were as common as cabbages. Although the ley line supported the entire three realms, there were less than 1,000 immortal kings in total. In the past 100 years, the leaders of the various realms had all ascended one after another. There were practically no truly peerless experts left. How could they possibly resist the pressure of 3,000 demon kings? Back then, we only managed to repel the demons because of Emperor Yi. At the time, we also had the 4 Sacred Beast clan heads, the head of the 100 Flowers Gate, and other peerless experts to quell the storm. But now, the atmosphere in the hall was as cold as ice. Shui furrowed his brows. He didn't want to see everyone so dispirited, but that was the truth. He couldn't allow this sort of atmosphere to continue. He pursed his lips, wanting to say something to raise morale. However, just as he was about to speak, he froze, as if he'd been struck by lightning. "Oh well, Shui." Stone was the first to notice his expression. He patted his shoulder. Shui stood there, dumbfounded. After a long while, he frowned at Stone and the others in the hall. "Everyone, the crisis has been completely resolved. You can now return to your clans in peace. I'm going to see someone, so I won't be seeing you off." Under everyone's confused gazes, Shui turned to leave. Stone frowned, hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Who is it?" Shui didn't speak. He simply mouthed the person's name. When he saw the shape of his lips, Stone froze as if he'd been electrocuted. In the blink of an eye, his eyes filled with wild joy. The rest of the people were still at a loss. How could the crisis be resolved so suddenly? "Brother Stone, what on earth is going on?" Stone clenched his fists tightly. He couldn't conceal the excitement on his face. He grinned at the people around him and laughed. "Do you know who Shui is going to see?" "Who?" "Yi Zichen, in a maple forest outside Maple City. Dried red, leaves littered the ground. Yi Zichen leaned against a tree trunk and stood atop one. Shui hurriedly appeared in the forest and immediately spotted Yi Zichen. "Yi, Shui, long time no see." As soon as he finished speaking, Shui pulled him into a bear hug. "So you really didn't die?" Shui's eyes lit up with delight. Back when you sealed away the vicious beast, we all felt like you couldn't have died so easily, given your abilities. A few years ago, you were the one who helped the 100 Flowers Gate resolve their problems, weren't you? You know, Yi Zichen was shocked. When you attacked, someone recorded it. Li Jiai and Zuo saw it through the jade slip. They were very certain that it was you, Xueqi said with a faint smile. What have you been doing all these years? Why haven't you come looking for us? Just what had I done in the past 100 years? Yi Zichen sighed emotionally. If he really had to explain, not even 3 days and 3 nights would be enough. Besides, he didn't want to talk about it. Yi Zichen smiled calmly, but didn't tell his story. Instead, he frowned at the solemn atmosphere of Maple City. Chapter 1177. Troubled, a cool breeze rustled through the maple forest, and the maple leaves on the ground danced along with the cyclone of the cool breeze. Xueqi gazed off into the distance at Maple City, which was bathed in a layer of silver light thanks to the ley line. He leaned against a tree trunk and chuckled. There's nothing wrong with the city. It's just that there's something wrong with the ley line. It's a good thing you came back. If you hadn't, forget about Maple City. Even the entire 3 realms would have suffered a fatal blow. Xueqi smiled faintly and felt much more at ease. Not long ago, he'd been worried about the demon's invasion and couldn't sleep at all. Now that Yi Zichen was back, he could finally relax. The ley line. He probed the ley line with his divine sense. When it sensed Yi Zichen's divine sense, the ley line responded affectionately. What's wrong with it? Xueqi smiled. You should know that our leisure house has been growing stronger and stronger over the past 100 years, but we're still a bit weak in terms of top-notch strength. Previously, the people of the 3 realms took care of us out of respect for you, but a few years ago, the 100 Flowers Gate's Li Jiai ascended as well. She ascended too? Yi Zichen had an indescribable feeling for Li Jiai. Their relationship was also unclear. They could be considered more than friends, but not lovers. Back in the modern realm, she'd intentionally left a birthmark on her face to make people think she was ugly. She was a bit timid, but in the end, after the 100 Flowers Gate's head passed away, she shouldered the heavy responsibility of being the head of the 100 Flowers Gate. The memories of the past were still vivid in his mind. He hadn't expected that by the time he returned, she'd already ascended. That's right. Although Li Jiai had the title of the head's disciple, she'd always kept a low profile. However, after she became the head of the 100 Flowers Gate, her shocking talent was on full display. In just 100 years, she expanded the 100 Flowers Gate by more than 10 times, said Xueqi emotionally. Under Li Jiai's leadership, the 100 Flowers Gate's transformation truly amazed him. It wasn't just him. Everyone in the immortal region sighed in admiration. Previously, when no one from the 100 Flowers Gate could hold up the banner, she suppressed her strength and refused to undergo her tribulation. However, 10 years ago, a genius girl suddenly appeared in the 100 Flowers Gate. 3 years ago, she became an immortal king, and Li Jiai ascended. However, after she ascended, our leisure house and the Dragon's Vein came in trouble. Where did this trouble come from? Asked Yi Zichen. Actually, you'll understand if I explain it to you. Sometimes, a faction's reputation determines the resources and wealth it can create. The reason why our leisure house became a peak force was all because of the support of the various realms, as well as the support of the 100 Flowers Gate and the Treasure Tower, said Xueqi. Yi Zichen nodded. In terms of peak strength, our leisure house is much weaker than many other forces. After Li Jiai ascended, there was a new faction whose leader, Zheng Chong, was an expert at the pinnacle of the Immortal King realm. It's just that they haven't dared to make a move against us because they're our allies. But not long ago, Zheng Chong somehow made contact with the demons. He has 3,000 Immortal King-level demon subordinates at his disposal. A few days ago, he wanted us to hand over the Dragon's Vein to him. Xueqi shrugged helplessly. How could he possibly deal with several thousand Immortal King-level experts? If Zheng Chong wanted to use them as a stepping stone, he could back down. But Zheng Chong wanted the Dragon's Vein. It was the foundation of the 3 realms. How could they possibly give it to him? 3,000 demon kings? Killing intent flashed through Yi Zichen's eyes. There was no need to think too much about it. It was highly likely that they'd been brought down by the demon realm. Instead of fighting for the Xinyuan sword, they'd sent 3,000 demon kings to steal the dragon's vein. And then there were the gods. There was no way they didn't know what the demons were up to, yet they didn't send reinforcements. It seemed that in their eyes, humans who hadn't become gods really were nothing more than ants. 3,000 demon kings. If it were a few days ago, he might not have had much of a chance of victory against them. But now he was supreme. In the lower three realms, the demon kings could do as they pleased, but in front of him, a supreme. He didn't even need the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Even if there were 30,000 of them, he could wipe them out with a wave of his hand. After all, they weren't even on the same level. Interesting. Yi Zichen's lips curled into a smile, but his gaze darkened. After all, 100 years ago, Yi Zichen had already fought against Black Dragon and the others. At the time, whether it was Black Dragon, Gu Li, the 4 zombie progenitors, or their combined Danglong, every single one of them could slay a demon king with a wave of their hand. Yi Zichen really never would have guessed that 100 years later, the demon kings had become such incredible existences. Of course, with the 3,000 demon kings, Zheng Chong can only threaten us verbally. He wouldn't dare attack us directly. In the end, he's still worried about our former allies taking revenge after ascending. It doesn't matter if he's just threatening us or actually trying to attack us. We can't let him live. Killing intent flashed through his eyes. As his expression darkened, a fierce wind howled through the maple forest. Yi Zichen absolutely wasn't the sort of person who liked to drag things out. Since they'd already reached this point, there was no need to let Zheng Chong live another day. It was best to nip any thread in the bud. Yi Zichen's divine awareness had already caught sight of the Zheng Chong Xue Qi had spoken of, as well as the 3,000 demon kings by his side. In the blink of an eye, Yi Zichen transformed into a blur and disappeared without a trace. Pool City. After 100 years, the city lord of Pool City had been replaced by someone Yi Zichen didn't recognize. In the northern part of Pool City, Zheng Chong reclined on a rattan chair and enjoyed a massage from maid. In this huge courtyard, the 3,000 immortal kings were like a private army, meticulously guarding it. Zheng Chong, right? A voice suddenly rang out. Zheng Chong was napping on a recliner, enjoying a massage from maid. Suddenly, he opened his eyes. Only then did he see a person standing in front of him. That person's body was twisted and distorted, as if projected from afar. Who are you? Zheng Chong's expression changed. I heard you're working for the demons right now. You want to lay line. Is that right? Asked the man. Zheng Chong gulped involuntarily. When he looked at his maids, he saw that they were all staring ahead in terror. They couldn't speak, nor could they move. Chapter 1178. Leopard Embryo Tendon Strengthening Pill. Suddenly, a name appeared in Zheng Chong's mind. Impossible. That person died 100 years ago. How could he appear here? Zheng Chong howled madly in his heart. He simply couldn't believe that the person who had appeared here was Emperor Yi, the one who had wiped out the leader of the demons 100 years ago, the one who had used his 3 souls to seal the vicious Danglong. However, if it wasn't him, then who else could it be? In terms of strength, Zheng Chong felt that he was already at the top of the top in the 3 realms. Right now, he could vaguely feel the arrival of the divine tribulation. Even with his strength, he could still feel such fear. Do they really exist in the 3 realms? No, I didn't. It's all. Regardless of whether or not this person was Emperor Yi, Zheng Chong couldn't stand up to him. He said with a terrified expression, but he found that he could not say a single word. 3,000 demon kings, how stingy. There were clearly supreme beings available, so why didn't they just send supreme beings to snatch the dragon vein? It seems that the fight for the Xinyuan sword is also very tense. Yi Zichen glanced at the 3,000 demon kings, who were also unable to move, then snapped his fingers. In an instant, thunder rumbled in the sky. 3,000 bolts of lightning descended from the sky at the same time, turning all 3,000 demon kings into ashes. You 2 maidservants, listen up. Let your gang find a new gang leader. If they want to follow in Zheng Chang's footsteps, feel free to come to my leisure house. I welcome them anytime. However, if you dare to associate with the devil race again, it won't be as simple as taking away the gang leader. With that, Yi Zichen's afterimage vanished from the courtyard. Zheng Chong also disappeared along with him. After Yi Zichen disappeared, the two terrified maids regained their ability to move. They couldn't help but yell. What happened? Not long after, two early-stage immortal kings ran into the courtyard. They couldn't help but frown as they looked at the scorched ground left behind by the heavenly lightning and the ashes of the demons. Where's Master? They were captured. The pale-faced maid stammered. He also said that we should find a new gang leader. If anyone else wants to follow in Lord Zheng Chang's footsteps, they can go to the leisure house to find him. He will entertain them anytime. He even said, what else is there to say? That person also said that if anyone dared to associate with the devil race in the future, it wouldn't be as simple as just taking away the gang leader. I didn't expect Leisure House to have such an expert. The two celestial kings, who were second only to Zheng Chong, fell silent. To be able to kidnap a peak celestial king without batting an eyelid, this kind of strength was enough to make them feel fear. In the maple forest, Xueqi didn't leave after Yi Zichen left. He stood quietly in the forest and gazed into the distance. Just now, when he saw the rumbling thunder in Pool City, he knew that Yi Zichen had gone. Suddenly, a figure fell from the sky like a sandbag. At the same time, Yi Zichen reappeared in the forest. That's him. Xueqi nodded as he pointed at the prostrating Zheng Chong. That's him. At this moment, Zheng Chong finally saw the appearance of his captor. What he couldn't believe was that, just as he thought, this person was Emperor Yi. Although he hadn't been born in that era, every one of the 9 cities of the Immortal Region had statues of Emperor Yi. It was impossible for him not to know. In the private school here, Emperor Yi was a legendary figure. So long as one attended school, who wouldn't know who he was? Emperor Yi, please spare this junior's life. Zheng Chong knelt and kowtowed repeatedly. Immortal kings had their own pride, and Zheng Chong was no different. However, he was now facing a former legend, a legend who'd created a new territory for the 3 realms. Besides, he knew full well that colluding with the demons was a crime. Let me ask you, how did you get involved with the demons? Asked Yi Zichen. A few days ago, this junior encountered them while out adventuring. In order to protect myself, I had no other choice. Zheng Chong couldn't continue. In order to protect himself, he had no other choice. That sounded rather pitiful. If that really was the case, then even if he'd obtained the 3,000 demon kings, he shouldn't have worked for the demons. You can't continue, can you? Yi Zichen smiled calmly, then asked, where did you meet them? How many of them were there? In the wastelands. 10 of them, 6 men and 4 women. Yi Zichen nodded. These 10 were most likely the supremes the demons had sent to fight over the Xinyuan sword. However, he couldn't be sure if they were Sky Supremes or Earth Supremes, or perhaps Diviners. If there were Diviners, things would be troublesome. Although he'd reached the peak of the 5 elements, the second floor of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda had yet to open. Without the help of a 9th stage Sky Supreme, it would be difficult for him to compete with the gods, Yao, and demons of the 3 realms. He didn't have what it took. More importantly, he couldn't be sure that there were 9th stage Sky Supremes on the 2nd floor. Yi Zichen furrowed his brows for a while. Zheng Chong was still kowtowing. Yi Zichen asked, "O.L. Shui, how do you think we should deal with him? Zheng Chong can be considered a peak expert on our side. If we let him die just like that, it'll be a loss for the 3 realms. It just so happens that the Leisure House is a bit weak in terms of peak experts. Emperor Yi, do you have any treasures we can use to control him?" As soon as Xueqi finished speaking, Yi Zichen knew what he was thinking. He wanted to enslave Zheng Chong and use him as a hired thug for the Leisure House. Yi Zichen agreed. Killing Zheng Chong would be as easy as lifting a blade, but this Wei Mian was a bit too cruel. It was letting him off too lightly. However, he really had no way of controlling him. Inexplicably, he thought back to the story of the deer and the cauldron he'd read in the modern realm. "I do, of course I do. He flipped his hand and took out a bottle of pills. The pill was dark green in color, and it looked a little like a poison. Feed this to him. Xueqi grabbed Zheng Chang's chin and tossed the pill in. After swallowing the pill, Zheng Chang's face contorted into an expression of extreme discomfort. When he saw this, Yi Zichen froze despite himself. In truth, that pill was nothing more than an ordinary spirit recovery pill. It seemed Zheng Chong was just being paranoid. But that was even better. This is a leopard embryo tendon-changing pill. You have to take the antidote every year. If you don't, you know what will happen. I'll give the antidote to Xueqi. From now on, you'd best obediently work for the leisure house. Otherwise, don't even think about getting the antidote. Yi Zichen crossed his arms and drooped his eyelids. He took out 2 bottles of ordinary pills and tossed them to Xueqi. Although Zheng Chong was unwilling, he'd already taken the poison pill. Just now, he felt a strange sensation in his body. He had no choice but to grit his teeth and agree. Chapter 1179. Wilderness people in fear weren't particularly meticulous in their thinking. Even though Zheng Chong had only taken an ordinary spirit recovery pill, he still firmly believed Yi Zichen's claim that it was a leopard embryo tension-changing pill. Although he'd never heard of a poison like the leopard embryo tension-changing pill, given Emperor Ye's methods, he didn't think it was fake. After taking the poison pill, Yi Zichen had Zheng Chong wait to the side. In the maple forest, after chatting with Xueqi for a bit, Xueqi expressed his intention to leave. You've only just returned. Why are you leaving? Aren't you going to see Stone and the others? Time is a little tight. Yi Zichen chuckled, then furrowed his brows. Do you know why Zheng Chong has thousands of Demon King-level subordinates? Zheng Chong, who was waiting in the distance, sensed the gazes directed at him. He did not dare to be negligent and smiled apologetically. Xueqi frowned as he looked at him, his eyes darting around a few times. Isn't it the demon race that covets the dragon vein? When he heard this, Yi Zichen nodded, then shook his head. This confused Xueqi, who looked at him in confusion. The demon race naturally covets the dragon vein. Otherwise, they wouldn't have asked Zheng Chong to find you and have you hand over the dragon vein. But this is only one of them, not the main point. The dragon vein was already considered the most precious treasure in the upper realm, but even it wasn't the main focus of the demon race's trip. Xueqi couldn't figure out why they were here. They're here for the Xianyuan sword, Yi Zichen said. Xianyuan sword? Exclaimed Xueqi. His shock was mostly due to Yi Zichen's reaction. He knew very well that the Xianyuan sword spirit and Soul Pearly Yuan had each sealed one of Donglong's souls. Even if the Xianyuan sword was an incredible divine artifact, a divine artifact that had lost its sword spirit was only made of relatively more precious materials. In terms of effectiveness, it was inferior to a semi-divine artifact. Xueqi couldn't understand why the demons would make such a big fuss over a divine artifact without a sword spirit. The only possibility was, could it be that the sword spirit that sealed Donglong? Xueqi hesitated. Just as you thought, the sword spirit of the Xianyuan sword has awakened. Yi Zichen nodded calmly, his gaze solemn. It's not just the demons of the upper 3 realms. The Yaoan gods have sent representatives as well. The people who came are all supreme beings and above. This, immortal kings were already extraordinary existences, but now Yi Zichen was saying that the 3 realms they lived in had a large number of supremes visiting them. Xueqi didn't know what to say. I came back this time for the Xianyuan sword. The Xianyuan sword has been my weapon since my first life. No matter what, I won't let anyone take it away from me. But there's no need to be in such a hurry. It had been far too long since he'd seen Yi Zichen and the others. He really wanted to catch up? There's no way to delay. Ever since I came here, I vaguely felt that Sister Xiang was about to recover. Just now, I used my divine sense to find her position. The people from the 3 sides are already there. It's better for me to get into position now, explained Yi Zichen. Now that he knew Yi Zichen had important matters to attend to, Xueqi didn't insist. Xueqi cupped his hands in greeting and said, Then I wish you success. Farewell. Yi Zichen cupped his hands, then disappeared into the maple forest. The wastelands. Although the three realms was a lower plane, it was so vast that it rivaled even the lower lands of the god realm's divine mountains. However, more than 60% of the three realms belonged to the wastelands. Although the land was lush, it wasn't suitable for living. Most of the vicious beasts that lived there had no intelligence, but they were extremely strong. Back when Yizichin was a beggar, he'd spent 100 years traveling the wastelands. He'd even sensed the aura of peak, immortal king-level vicious beasts in the depths. Because the wastelands weren't suitable for living and had no natural treasures, few people ventured there. The vicious beasts that lived there never left, either. The three realms and the wastelands had always lived in relative harmony. However, just half a month ago, quite a few uninvited guests arrived in the depths of the wastelands. In front of a vast mountain range in the depths of the wilderness, there was a ray of golden light above the mountain range. This ray of light had suddenly appeared 100 years ago. After it appeared, the golden light automatically formed a barrier that enveloped the entire mountain range. The ferocious beasts within the mountain range were also repelled by the light barrier. Several groups of people stood in front of the mountain range. They were divided into 3 camps, each of which consisted of gods, Yao, and demons. At the very front of each camp was an existence with a terrifying aura. They radiated their auras, using the strength of their auras to control the territory they controlled. At the same time, they restrained the other 2 groups. Within each camp, there were a few smaller camps. They were on guard and wary of each other, but all of their gazes were fixed on the golden light that shot into the sky. The vicious beasts that had been repelled by the golden light had settled near the mountain range. However, because of these people, the vicious beasts had no choice but to give up their homes. These people's auras were simply too terrifying. Vicious beasts weren't intelligent, but that didn't mean they couldn't sense danger. On the other hand, they were even more sensitive to threats. Your Excellency. On the demon's side, a female demon expert appeared in front of Jackdaw, who was still sitting cross-legged in midair. Jackdaw, who seemed to be asleep, opened its eyes. The instant it did, 2 powerful auras swept towards it. Narrowing his eyes, he sent out a surge of demonic energy to scatter the 2 auras. After repelling the 2 auras, he licked his lips arrogantly and looked at the 2 experts from the god race and the demon race with a provocative gaze. "What's wrong?" Jackdaw asked the female demon as he taunted her. She leaned over and whispered in his ear. Jackdaw's brows furrowed slightly, but he instantly composed himself. He dismissed the female demon, then closed his eyes once more. "All 3,000 demon kings are dead," Jackdaw muttered to himself. Just now, the female demon had reported to him that Yizichin had used heavenly lightning to instantly obliterate all 3,000 demon kings. When that thunderbolt appeared, I sensed that it was an expert. I never would have guessed he'd actually attack my subordinates. Once I bring the Xinyuan sword back to the clan, I like to see for myself just what kind of person killed 3,000 of my subordinates. Even though he knew someone had killed all 3,000 demon kings, the Xinyuan sword had broken through the mountains. This was the most critical moment. He had no way of withdrawing. All he could do was wait until the fight for the Xinyuan sword was over, then deal with the person who dared touch his subordinates. However, right at that moment, rumble. Chapter 1180. The Xinyuan sword leaves the mountain rumble. The entire mountain range rumbled. Countless rocks tumbled down, and the earth shook as if an earthquake had struck. Jackdaw and the 2 Yao and God Race experts simultaneously opened their eyes and looked at the mountain range. A crack had appeared in the middle of the endless mountain range that stretched for hundreds of miles. A dazzling golden light lingered in the crack, and under this golden light, a longsword broke out of the mountain. Next to the longsword was a naked woman. Her eyes were shut, and her body was curled up like a baby. She hovered in the air. The Xinyuan sword. At practically the same time, the supreme experts of the demon, Yao, and god races attacked. However, in comparison, the tiger-striped middle-aged man on the demon clan side was slightly faster. As he headed for the mountain range, he slapped his palms outwards, unleashing 2 gusts of wind. These 2 gusts of wind clearly hindered Jackdaw's and the sword-bearing man's movements. Although it was only for a moment, it was enough for the Yao to widen the distance between them and reach the mountain range with a clear advantage. Damn it! When they saw his movements, Jackdaw and the sword-bearing man inwardly cursed. However, their hands didn't remain idle. They formed hand seals and unleashed several spiritual arts. Old Crow, O.L. Chun, I, the Inhu Saint, will gladly accept the Xianyuan sword. The tiger-striped man at the front laughed heartily. When he was 100 meters away from the mountain range, he let out a fierce roar and stretched out his right hand. It transformed into a tiger's arm, and a tiger's claw slammed into the Xianyuan sword and the sword spirit, threatening to shatter the entire mountain range. This palm strike could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. As it pressed down, the air pressure beneath it increased by 100-fold. Under the pressure of this palm, the ground showed signs of sinking. Get over here. Don't even think about it. Jackdaw and the sword-bearing man tried to stop him, but the giant hand descended too quickly. Before they could complete their hand seals, the tiger-striped man's hand slammed into the Xianyuan sword. Boom! The palm collided with the mountain range, and a deafening sound immediately rang out between heaven and earth. The tiger-striped, middle-aged man's eyes were filled with excitement, but it didn't take long for his expression to change. The mountain range's light shield suddenly flashed with a dazzling radiance, directly shattering his dermic seal giant hand. At the same time that the dermic seal giant hand was shattered, the skin on his right arm was lacerated and the bones were crushed. Humph! A muffled groan came from his nostrils. The tiger-striped, middle-aged man hugged his arms and took a few steps back in shock. The Yao Supremes all hurried over. Jackdaw and the sword-bearing man smiled in relief, then stopped. TSK, TSK, TSK. The demon race really doesn't disappoint me. Their brains are never enough. It's no wonder that demons can only be beasts and can't become humans or devils. When he saw the tiger-striped, middle-aged man injured, Jackdaw added insult to injury. Sage Inhu, you've really tarnished the reputation of your sages. The surrounding Yao's eyes blazed with fury. The tiger-striped, middle-aged man's expression darkened, but he didn't retort. Instead, he silently sat down, took out a stalk of grass, and tossed it into his mouth. As soon as the medicinal pill entered his mouth, a ball of light appeared around him. Under the illumination, his right arm visibly healed. It was obvious that this spirit herb was no ordinary one. TSK, TSK, TSK. Is this how the Yao live these days? You can't even refine good divine grass into pills, yet you eat it. What a waste. When he saw the herb, Jackdaw seemed a little envious. He cursed resentfully. Envious, right? The tiger-striped, middle-aged man snorted and rose to his feet. By now, his arm was completely healed. He glanced coldly at Jackdaw and said disdainfully, "We Yao might not have much else, but we do have a lot of natural treasures. So what if we eat divine grass as we please? Do you think everyone's like you demons? You can't even grow a single blade of grass, so you have to buy materials from us and humans? You want to eat pills too, but how many of you Yao can refine divine pills? So what if you have more divine grass? In the end, you'll still have to buy pills from us and humans. I don't know what you're so smug about." Cursed Jackdaw. The tiger-striped, middle-aged man's expression was unsightly. Yao territory was truly rich in resources. Divine grass and immortal grass could be found everywhere. However, it was just as Jackdaw said, Yao's talent for refining pills was far inferior to that of humans and demons. In the entire Yao realm, the number of people who could refine divine-grade pills could be counted on 2 hands. As the Yao and demons cursed at each other, the sword-wielding man felt a little embarrassed. Both sides had brought up the human race. For some reason, he felt like he'd been implicated. Jackdaw, Inhu, both of you stop talking. The sword-wielding man stepped forward to act as a peacemaker. The demon's territory is just like that. It's not suitable for medicinal plants to grow, so you can't blame them. Yao aren't good at refining pills, and tens of thousands of years ago, the Five Elements Great Emperor captured practically all of their pill, artifact, and talisman masters. That's why they've suffered such heavy losses. We all have our own difficulties, so let's talk a little less. Besides, we didn't come here to argue, did we? Chun Jianan, shut your mouth. Just looking at you humans annoys me, snorted Jackdaw. Chun Jianan. He never would have guessed that the tiger-striped man would actually reach an agreement with him. He didn't give the sword-wielding man any face. When it came to refining pills, humans were the best. The strongest alchemists belonged to them. When it came to immortal and divine medicines, humans didn't have any fewer resources than Yao. On average, humans cultivated faster than demons and Yao. After becoming an immortal king, they could transcend divine tribulation and ascend to godhood. Their strength would immediately skyrocket. Humans were doted on by all, but wouldn't be angry at them. Chun Jianan looked like a good-tempered man. Despite Enhu and Jackdaw's treatment, he could still laugh. Fine. I'll apologize on behalf of the humans. Can you please calm down? Chun Jianan smiled warmly, but then his gaze darkened. He looked at the Xianyuan sword and the curled-up sword spirit. He frowned. That Xianyuan sword isn't easy to take. Asking who if it's easy. Didn't he just suffer a loss? Tell us how it feels, said Jackdaw. Why should I tell you? Although that was what Enhu said, he still narrowed his eyes and said, Just now, I fused an arm of my sovereign celestial body into that palm strike and used all the power of a level 9 Sky Supreme. However, when I slapped down, a strange power appeared in the barrier protecting the Xianyuan sword and sword spirit, and it directly shattered the celestial body's arm. Are you saying that we have to wait for them to fuse? Chun Jianan furrowed his brows. Chapter 1181. Jackdaw's conjecture atop the mountain range. The Xianyuan sword and its sword spirit shone with dazzling golden light. However, compared to when it destroyed Enhu's Dharma body, it was a little more restrained. The golden light swirled around the sword and its spirit. As Enhu and Chun Jianan looked at them, they used their divine senses to lock onto each other, afraid that the other would seize the initiative. Jackdaw's point of view made Chun Jianan knit his brows. He was rather interested in Jackdaw's strange point of view. Brother Jackdaw, why would you think that? Don't listen to his nonsense, snorted Enhu, his expression dark and sullen. It seemed he was still angry that Jackdaw had slandered the Yao race. In the demon race, there are too many people like you who don't think before doing anything. That's why people think that you demon race are barbaric and unintelligent. Jackdaw's words had reached a certain level of sharpness. Just a second ago, Enhu had slandered him, but a second later, Jackdaw's words hit the nail on the head and rebuked him. As soon as these words came out, most of the people in the demon race revealed looks of terror. They'd come with Enhu, and now, Enhu's reputation had risen. All the demons present knew his character very well. Even those of the human clan who were familiar with him changed their expressions. They were worried that he would act on impulse before the Xianyuan sword was fully unsheathed. Everyone here knew full well that once the Xianyuan sword appeared, they'd fight over it. It wasn't just the other two sides. Even their own factions were here for different masters. In the end, they could all become enemies. Fighting was inevitable, but no one wanted to break this balance before the Xianyuan sword emerged from the mountain. Chun Jianan glared at Jackdaw, a little annoyed at his blabbermouth. Then he walked over to Enhu, hoping he'd calm down a little. To everyone's surprise, after Enhu's expression changed dramatically, he unclenched his fists and snorted with a fake smile. Then why don't you tell me who the sword is waiting for? Are you going to tell me it's already chosen a master? In that case, why don't we try it out separately? Let's see who's the one who could take it out first. Chun Jianan couldn't help but look at Enhu in a new light when he gave up. He was famous among the Yao race for his fiery temper. It seemed that after so many years, not only had his strength improved by leaps and bounds, his shrewdness had also improved greatly. Before coming here, Chun Jianan only viewed Jackdaw as an opponent. Enhu's actions forced him to take him seriously. He actually endured it. Jackdaw was a little surprised by Enhu's reaction. He'd said all that on purpose. He really couldn't tolerate this kind of peace right now. If he took the initiative to stir up trouble, he would inevitably become the target of gossip when he returned. He had wanted to use Enhu's rage to break the boring balance in the arena. Unexpectedly, Enhu managed to restrain himself. Jackdaw inwardly cursed himself for being bored. He licked his teeth and replied somewhat arrogantly, "Don't you know whether the Xianyuan sword has chosen a master or not? Don't you know whose weapon this Xianyuan sword belongs to? Don't tell me. This is a must, okay? You even have the gall to try it out one by one? Don't tell me the Yellow Emperor of the Xianyuan clan reincarnated into your Yao race. Come on, drag him out and let me see just which good-for-nothing bastard is willing to be your little brother." Enhu's expression shifted. Just now, he'd endured Jackdaw's rebuke, and his heart was already burning with rage. Now, he was on the verge of collapse. In his fury, Enhu didn't understand the deeper meaning behind Jackdaw's words. All he knew was that Jackdaw was indirectly cursing him. Chun Jianan, on the other hand, understood. He couldn't help but knit his brows. "Brother Jackdaw, are you saying that the Xianyuan sword is waiting for the Yellow Emperor's reincarnation? But if my information is correct, Yi Zichen, the 9th reincarnation of the Xianyuan clan's Yellow Emperor, fought the vicious Danglong 100 years ago. He used his divine artifacts, the Xianyuan sword, Soul Pearly Yuan, and his own soul to seal it. Right now, a part of Danglong's soul is suppressed beneath this mountain range. If he can reincarnate 9 times, can't he reincarnate 10 times?" Jackdaw's words left both Chun Jianan and Enhu speechless. You might say that without a soul, there's no way to reincarnate. But when it comes to understanding souls, you humans in Yao dare say you understand them better than us demons. Chun Jianan and the others were stunned speechless by the Jackdaw's words. They stared at the antennae on the Jackdaw's head. The antennae on the Jackdaw's head swayed back and forth. Although Enhu's brain isn't very good, in terms of strength, he's no weaker than you or me. In fact, he's a bit stronger. You and I both know this. Chun Jianan nodded. Even though Enhu was about to explode in anger at Jackdaw's praise, after hearing Jackdaw's flattery, he calmed down and rubbed his nose proudly. If even he can't break the barrier, then we naturally can't either. No one here can break it. We're all 9th-stage Sky Supremes. If we can't break it, do you think a diviner will come down? If a diviner really could break it, the higher-ups wouldn't have sent us here, would they? What's more, the Xianyuan sword naturally has its reasons for being the number 1 divine artifact of the ancient times. Even the Eastern Emperor Bell waits for the Eastern Emperor, so why can't the Xianyuan sword wait for its master, the Yellow Emperor? Even if Enhu's brain wasn't very good, he understood what Jackdaw was trying to say. Chun Jianan understood even better. What Jackdaw was trying to say was that even a diviner wouldn't be able to break the barrier. All they could do was wait. Perhaps the Xianyuan sword's master would appear, and they'd fight over it. For now, let's just sit here and wait. Once the master of the Xianyuan sword appears, we'll be able to get to work. Jackdaw shrugged, then narrowed his eyes. Of course, if you want to make a move ahead of time and reduce each other's strength, I'll raise both hands in approval. When they saw his excited expression, Chun Jianan and Enhu curled their lips in speechlessness. Jackdaw was a madman. Others might pay attention to their own safety in a fight, but he was willing to throw his life away and enjoy the thrill of battle. Even Enhu, who Jackdaw said was stronger than him, and Chun Jianan, rubbed his nose resentfully. He didn't even look Jackdaw in the eye. How boring. Jackdaw, who'd been itching for a fight, was snubbed by Chun Jianan and the others. Bored, he sighed and returned to the demon's territory. When Chun Jianan and Enhu saw him leave, they sighed with relief. Their gazes fell on the mountain range, fixed on the number 1 divine artifact on the rankings. Chapter 1182. Chapter 1182. Xianyuan Xiang's awakening the sun and moon alternated. It was a full moon, and its moonlight bathed the earth in a silvery sheen. Atop the mountain range, the Xianyuan sword and its sword spirit glowed with golden light like a miniature sun, eternally radiating golden light. Off in the distance, Chun Jianan, Enhu, and Jackdaw landed in their respective camps, ready for battle. They'd been here for several days now, and didn't dare relax in the slightest. Even Earth and sky supremes like them were starting to feel tired after such a long period of tension. However, before the Xianyuan sword and the other two races, they couldn't let down their guard. Buzz! At this moment, a golden wave suddenly rippled outward from the Xianyuan sword above the mountain range. In the blink of an eye, all three factions unleashed their divine power. They were on high alert as they looked at the mountain range. The golden wave from before was only the beginning. After that golden wave, there were still several more golden waves being released. At the same time, the mountain range, which stretched for hundreds of kilometers, began to show signs of collapsing. Bottomless ravines appeared on the ground where the three factions stood, causing the entire land to split apart. Furthermore, the cracks continued to spread into the distance. Even the immortal region, millions of kilometers away, sensed the tremors. Even the 9 cities outside the immortal region felt them. The beast region was filled with the cries of birds and the roars of beasts. Countless major powers emerged from seclusion, either to perform divination or to observe the stars. In short, they did everything they could to figure out the cause of the tremors. Are they coming out? Chun Jianan gripped his sword so tightly his palms began to sweat. His divine sense locked onto the entire wastelands. If everything was as Jackdaw had predicted, the Yellow Emperor's reincarnation was probably already in the wilderness. Inhu's eyes grew solemn as well. His gaze flickered between the Xianyuan sword, Chun Jianan, and Jackdaw. The Xianyuan sword's sudden movements plunged everyone into a state of intense anxiety. Only Jackdaw remained excited. Finally, I can fight around. Among them, there was one person with a strange expression. He was one of the demons, the one who'd spoken up to stop Jackdaw from attacking the immortal region, Cain. At this time, his eyes were not locked on the Xianyuan sword, nor were they on the human clan or the demon clan. With a deep frown, he had been looking at the periphery of the three forces. Could it be that he has come? His gaze changed as he looked around, but at this moment, a cry of surprise pulled his gaze back to the mountain range. She opened her eyes. The expert of the demon race pointed at the sword spirit Xianyuan Xiang in the mountain range. As she spoke, Xianyuan Xiang, who was curled up like a baby, stretched out her curled-up body. Her smooth body was surrounded by a holy radiance, completely covering her private parts. At the same time, her eyes opened. Her hair cascaded over her shoulders like a waterfall. Barefoot, she tapped the air lightly with her jade-like feet and grabbed the hilt of the Xianyuan sword with her right hand. She pulled the sword out of the mountains that were deeply embedded in them. What a goddess! When the humans, Yao, and demons saw Xianyuan Xiang, quite a few of them looked infatuated and muttered to themselves. Compared to Xianyuan Xiang, the women who'd come with them paled in comparison, like fluorescent lights in front of the bright moon. Xianyuan Xiang, the sword spirit of the Xianyuan sword, took a few steps forward. Every step she took left a ripple in the air. When she reached the edge of the mountain range's barrier, she stopped. From her eyes, one could clearly see that she was at a loss at this moment. Her gaze was constantly changing, as if she was looking for someone. It really is as Jackdaw said. When he saw this, Chun Jianan furrowed his brows. His divine sense had already enveloped the entire wasteland. Even the slightest disturbance would alert him immediately. It wasn't just him. Inhu was the same. The key to obtaining the Xianyuan sword was likely the Yellow Emperor's reincarnation. Xianyuan Xiang stood dazedly at the edge of the barrier and gazed off into the distance. Disappointment gradually filled her eyes. When they saw her frown, quite a few of the men present felt their hearts ache. They didn't want to see their goddess like that. Could it be that the Yellow Emperor's reincarnation hasn't arrived? Chun Jianan muttered to himself. In an instant, he saw the dazed Xianyuan Xiang's eyes light up with radiant joy. Both Chun Jianan and Inhu trembled. Atop the mountain range, Xianyuan Xiang smiled brilliantly, her face wreathed in joy. It didn't take long for her to merge into the Xianyuan sword, as if she couldn't wait any longer. The moment she entered the sword, the simple and unadorned Xianyuan sword shone with a golden light. Golden light soared into the sky, shattering the light barrier protecting them. Whoosh! 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 The instant the barrier shattered, 3 blurs streaked across the sky. Chun Jianan was the first to bear the brunt of the attack. The divine sword in his hand glowed with dazzling light, and as he sped through the air, it continuously fired beams of sword light. The light sliced through the air, landing directly in front of Jackdaw and Inhu. Jackdaw grinned and used his physical body to take the blow. Purple blood flowed from his chest, making him even more excited. That's right. That's the way. A crazed look flashed through his eyes. Jackdaw grinned and stomped fiercely through the air. With each step, the void shattered, revealing pitch-black primordial chaos. On the other side, Inhu's eyes flashed. He clenched his claws, shattering the sword light. Then he stopped, gathered his energy in his dantian, and opened his mouth wide. Roar! The sound wave attack was accompanied by the roar of a dragon and the roar of tiger. It shattered the space in front of the 3 of them. The space collapsed, revealing pitch-black primordial chaos. Chun Jianan, who was at the very front, had no choice but to slow down and be careful. If he wasn't careful and got sucked into the primordial chaos, even a diviner would lose his way and never be able to return. Chun Jianan, Inhu, and Jackdaw exchanged blows. Their allies didn't just stand there, either. Exquisite battle techniques, magical treasures, and talismans clashed, illuminating the moonlit night with a myriad of colors. Just as they were exchanging blows, the space around them twisted, and a black-robed youth stepped out. He glanced indifferently at the chaotic battle between the immortals, gods, and demons. Then his gaze fell on the Xianyuan sword atop the mountain range. The Xianyuan sword seemed to have sensed his gaze, and its blade trembled violently. With a rumble, it transformed into a golden arc that pierced through Chun Jianan, Inhu, and Inhu. It passed through the 3 forces and landed firmly in the youth's hand. Big Sister Xiang, I knew you'd come. She put her hands on her hips in a domineering manner. When he saw her like this, the youth chuckled helplessly. He ran his fingers over the blade of the sword, his gaze cold as he looked at the others. Chapter 1183. Yi Zichen. Chapter 1183. Despicable Yi Zichen. As soon as the Xianyuan sword fell into his hands, Yi Zichen sensed at least a dozen divine senses lock onto him. Ordinary people couldn't possibly enjoy the honor of being taken seriously by so many supremes. Of course, this honor was accompanied by suffocating pressure. Do these people have a grudge against you? Asked the sword spirit, Xianyuan Xiang, after a few glances at him. I didn't have a grudge against them before, but now. I'm afraid I do, and it's no small grudge, either. Yi Zichen gripped the Xianyuan sword tightly, his nerves completely taut. He might have fantasized on his way here, but now that he was here, they were all Sky Supremes, right? Earlier, he'd been smug about becoming an Earth Supreme, but now. Could he just laugh? Can you beat them? Xianyuan Xiang felt like she'd lost her mind. She could sense Yi Zichen's tension. If he could beat them, how could he possibly be like this? How about we run? That's what I was thinking. With that, Yi Zichen put the Xianyuan sword back on his back, then smiled at the 3 factions of demons, Yao, and gods. You've all worked hard. His initiative didn't get any response from anyone. Those people were still staring at him with cold eyes. Yi Zichen's heart trembled involuntarily. He scratched his head, then laughed. I see you're all tired, so I won't waste any more time with you. How about this? I'll treat you to a drink sometime. Goodbye. Yi Zichen cupped his fists, smiled, and retreated. However, he saw that although they didn't say anything to him, they'd completely sealed off his path of retreat. It could be said that there was no door to heaven and no door to hell. You can leave, but leave the Xianyuan sword behind. The godly sword in Chun Jianan's hand flashed with a sharp, cold light. Under the moonlight, it shimmered coldly. You're going a little too far. The Xianyuan sword was mine to begin with. I'm just here to take back the weapon that belongs to me. Why do you have to be like this? Aren't you a bandit? Yi Zichen laughed drily, but he wasn't just laughing foolishly. While talking to Chun Jianan, he was also vaguely sensing which side's defense was weaker. If he wanted to break through, where would he have the highest chance of success? Cut the crap. Hurry up and hand over the Xianyuan sword. Who shouted angrily. Look at you. Your temper is too explosive. Wouldn't it be better if you talked to me for a while? Yi Zichen sighed helplessly. His eyes were filled with helplessness as he looked around at the three groups surrounding him. It had to be said that through his instantaneous judgment, none of these people's positions were easy to break through. These people were simply too much stronger than him, with his strength at the Earth's sovereign realm. Even if he had the Xianyuan sword, it would be impossible for him to deal with these heavenly sovereigns, especially the 3 9th-stage heavenly sovereigns who posed the greatest threat to him. Forcefully breaking through would be a bit difficult. Since this plan didn't work, Yi Zichen thought of another method. Everyone, if you really want the Xianyuan sword, then I can only give it to you for the sake of my own life. Xianyuan Xiang angrily drew the Xianyuan sword from her back and immediately yelled, You really want to give it to me? Shut up. Yi Zichen narrowed his eyes and told her to shut up, then shrugged. This sword has been with me for a long time, so I'm a bit reluctant to give it to her. Yi Zichen smiled at Chen Jiannan and the others, then frowned at Xianyuan Xiang. Hey, sword spirit, why are you so stupid? I'm just a nobody. You're the #1 divine artifact of the primordial era. If you follow me, you'll only make your brilliance dim. There are so many experts here right now. If you follow them, your future will be even better. Besides, the situation is clear. I can't take you with me. If I try to take you by force, I'm afraid I'll die. I care about my life. It's not worth it to throw it away for you. Yi Zichen shook his head at Xianyuan Xiang, as if afraid of death. His expression made it seem as if he really wanted to abandon her. Yi Zichen, what do you take me for? Roared Xianyuan Xiang. A weapon, of course. What else could it be? Said Yi Zichen disdainfully. You. When she heard Yi Zichen say that, Xianyuan Xiang felt as if she'd been struck by lightning. Her eyes glazed over and she laughed foolishly. A weapon. She never would have guessed that in his eyes, she was nothing more than a weapon. Xianyuan Xiang had followed Yi Zichen ever since the dragons forged her. From the first life of the Yellow Emperor to the current Yi Zichen, she'd never left his side. She'd never served two masters. The moment she laid eyes on the Yellow Emperor, she decided that from now on, he was her only master. 100 years ago, he'd fused his godhead with her. In a moment of life and death, he'd asked her to use her spirit to protect one of his 3 souls. She'd agreed without hesitation. At the time, she'd just fused with a godhead. A weapon fused with a godhead? It had never appeared before in all of history. Even the God Emperor of the God race would take it seriously. So long as she wanted to, she could climb up the tree and become a phoenix. But she didn't. In her heart, Yi Zichen was her only master. His words, like a prophecy. 100 years later, the first person she sought out after awakening was Yi Zichen. But now, Yi Zichen was going to hand her over to these people of unknown origins for the sake of his own life. You. Xianyuan Xiang couldn't speak. She took physical form and pointed at Yi Zichen, her eyes filled with disappointment. Big Sister Xiang, please help me one more time. Despite her desolate expression, Yi Zichen didn't blame himself in the slightest. Instead, he shamelessly begged her. This behavior infuriated quite a few of the people surrounding Yi Zichen. Quite a few of them inwardly cursed Yi Zichen for being such a scum. Xianyuan Xiang was utterly disappointed in Yi Zichen. When he said those words, she was utterly disappointed. All right, no problem. With a carefree smile, Xianyuan Xiang merged back into the Xianyuan sword. When Yi Zichen saw this, he grinned. Everyone, look, I've already convinced her. I'll leave the sword with you now. Can I? Can I leave now? Sure. Although Chen Jiannan and the others despised Yi Zichen's behavior, their mission was to obtain the Xianyuan sword. They couldn't be bothered to care about Yi Zichen's character. Xianyuan Xiang, who'd fused with the Xianyuan sword, struggled with all her might to escape Yi Zichen's grasp, but to her surprise, Yi Zichen tightened his grip on her, still grinning like a villain. Chapter 1184. Attract the Xianyuan sword's fate was obviously a very important issue. Whether it was humans, Yao, or demons, they all valued the Xianyuan sword's ownership. Everyone wanted to bring it back to their leaders and claim credit for it. Now that the sword was in Yi Zichen's hands, no matter which side he gave it to, the other two wouldn't agree. Inhu and Chun Jianan looked at each other. They both sensed clear hostility in each other's eyes. Previously, the three sides had surrounded Yi Zichen harmoniously, but now, in response to his question, they were all wary of each other. Forget it. I'm a human, after all. How about I give the sword to a human expert? Sensing the change in the atmosphere, Yi Zichen said helplessly. No way. Inhu and the people from the demon clan immediately spoke up to stop them. Whoever had the sword in their hands would have the absolute initiative. If Yi Zichen really gave the sword to Chun Jianan, wouldn't that be terrible? This. Can't I? Yi Zichen shrank back in fear. He looked around cautiously, gripped the Xianyuan sword, and didn't seem to know what to do. Why not? Kid, so long as you give me the sword, I can guarantee that you'll leave this place unscathed. A rough-looking man immediately stepped forward. He was tall and burly, and, standing in the crowd, he was clearly several times larger than the others. As he spoke, he slapped his chest so hard that it made thumping sounds. Little brother, how about you give the sword to your big sister? I can guarantee that you'll leave this place unscathed. How about it? Not only can I help you leave, but I can also agree to a small request of yours. So long as it's not too outrageous, I can agree to anything. As soon as the brawny man spoke, a fox-like woman stepped out of the crowd. She swayed her slender waist, looked at Yi Zichen with seductive eyes and seductive fingers, and lured him to hand the Xianyuan sword to her. How laughable! You really have the gall to say that I'll leave unscathed. Another arrogant, cold laugh rang out. Kid, if you give the Xianyuan sword to anyone else, I guarantee that you won't live past tomorrow. But if you give it to me, that's a different story. After that, several others spoke up. These people either threatened or tempted. In short, what they wanted was the ownership of the Xianyuan sword. Yi Zichen, who stood in the middle of the crowd, looked around in distress. Wherever he looked, everyone smiled kindly and made small gestures with him. Then what do you think I should do now? Yi Zichen clutched his head in distress, then looked at the surrounding people in confusion. You all want the Xianyuan sword so much, but there's only one Xianyuan sword. Who should I give it to? If I gave this one, that one said it wanted me dead. If I gave that one said it wanted me dead. I made it very clear. I cherish my life. I want to live. Give them to me. Give them to me. Give them to me. The surrounding people shouted like crazy, but Yi Zichen still had a troubled expression on his face. That won't do. All of you are saying nice things. Who knows what will happen if I give you the sword? I only have this one life, so I have to be careful with it. How about this? You guys decide a victor, and I'll give the sword to the strongest among you. That way, I can be completely certain of my safety. What do you think? Give me the Xianyuan sword, and I can guarantee your safety for 100 years. I, Inhu, am a man of my word. At that moment, Inhu took a few steps forward, and the faint image of an ancient tiger, tens of thousands of feet long, appeared behind him. Here, I, Inhu, am publicly acknowledged as the strongest. Everyone in the Yao race knows that I, Inhu, am a man of my word. If I say I can guarantee your safety for 100 years, I can guarantee it. Really? Even after hearing Inhu's words, Yi Zichen still looked apprehensive. He glanced around Chun Jianan and Jackdaw. He couldn't be bothered to pay any attention to the small fries surrounding him. The ones Yi Zichen valued the most were Jackdaw, Inhu, and Chun Jianan. They were the strongest of the crowd. Inhu had already spoken. He was now waiting for Chun Jianan and Jackdaw's response. You've really made a clever move. Chun Jianan smiled calmly. After seeing Yi Zichen's acting just now, he'd really believed everything he'd said. But now, if he still couldn't figure out what was going on, then he'd truly lived his life for nothing. Boss, I don't understand, said Yi Zichen, feigning ignorance. I just want to guarantee my own safety. I value my life a lot, so it's no problem for me to think things through. Chun Jianan pressed his lips into a smile and said, Forget it. I can't be bothered to argue with you. That way, you won't have to worry about who to give the Xianyuan sword to. Just put the sword on the ground. In the end, we'll decide who it belongs to. It has nothing to do with you, so don't worry. Then my safety. I, Chun Jianan, promise you that you can absolutely leave this place unscathed. You won't be in any danger. The people surrounding you won't dare attack you either. Brother Jackdaw, Brother Inhu, what do you think? Chun Jianan looked at Yi Zichen, then back at Jackdaw and Inhu. That's fine. Inhu nodded. So long as the Xin Yuan sword didn't end up in Jackdaw or Chun Jianan's hands, he could accept a fair fight. Of course, I have no problem with that either. Jackdaw had seen through Yi Zichen's little trick right from the start. However, he didn't point it out. No matter what the result was, they'd still have to fight. As long as he could fight, that was enough for him. After gaining Inhu and Jackdaw's approval, Chun Jianan smiled at Yi Zichen. All right, since Brother Inhu and Brother Jackdaw have no objections, then please put down the Xin Yuan sword and leave. That's no fun at all. Even after Chun Jianan made his decision, Yi Zichen didn't loosen his grip on the Xin Yuan sword. Instead, he hugged it to his chest and snorted with an insincere smile. He finally understood. Chun Jianan and Jackdaw had long since seen through his plan. Just now, in their eyes, he'd been nothing more than a clown jumping around. He'd wasted all his energy putting on an act. In the end, he'd gained nothing at all. Inhu, on the other hand, seemed to have fallen right into his trap. It seemed Inhu's brain wasn't working very well. What do you mean, Your Excellency? Chun Jianan pressed his lips into a smile. Chapter 1185. 5 elements appear. Chapter 1185. His words were like a proverb, and the wind rose with his voice. As soon as Yi Zichen finished speaking, fierce winds howled through the endless wastelands. 9 tornadoes soared into the sky, destroying heaven and earth. Wherever the winds howled, mountains crumbled and ancient trees snapped. Countless blades of wind whistled through the air like incomparably sharp blades of sword energy. When they landed in front of the surrounding Supremes, they left shallow, bloody gashes on their bodies. You've got some skill. Chun Jianan reached out with his right hand. Given his strength, those seemingly swift blades of wind were nothing to him. In truth, he let the blades of wind hit the back of his hand on purpose. He wanted to see just how powerful they were. The results were obvious. The blades of wind could pierce through his physical defenses. He could tell that Yi Zichen was just an early-stage Earth Supreme. For his battle techniques, to be this effective was already impressive. However, this wasn't something Yi Zichen could be proud of. This was a new level of wind he'd comprehended. It was countless times stronger than the wind he'd released before. Yet in the end, he'd only managed to scratch a thin layer of skin. This was far too disappointing. And that was just against Chun Jianan. When the blades of wind landed on Jackdaw and Inhu, they didn't even break their skin. This is far more troublesome than I imagined. Yi Zichen frowned and sighed inwardly. Then he turned to Xin Yuan Xiang and said, Big Sister Xiang, go hide in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda for a while. Didn't you say you were going to give me away? Snorted Xin Yuan Xiang. Do you really think I'm that sort of person? Yi Zichen pursed his lips speechlessly. All right, stop throwing a tantrum. Go hide in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda for a while. I'm going to play with these guys for a while. He conveniently stored the Xin Yuan sword in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. The supreme beings present had been paying attention to the Xin Yuan sword in his hand all this time. When they saw that the Xin Yuan sword had disappeared from his hand, their faces all darkened. Where did you hide the Xin Yuan sword? Guess. Yi Zichen pressed his lips into a calm smile. When the others heard that, they laughed arrogantly. No matter how you hide it, it can't possibly disappear from your body. Once you've dealt with it, it'll naturally reappear. Then go ahead and try. Yi Zichen's gaze darkened, and he stomped the ground with his right foot. From the position under his feet, under the tremendous force, it immediately shattered in all directions. He raised his hands high into the air, and the 9 tornadoes returned to his side. Yi Zichen stood in the middle of the fierce winds, his robes and long hair fluttering in the wind. His eyes instantly flashed with a sharp light. Rain. In a radius of 10,000 miles, magical rain poured down in torrents. The magical rain continuously corroded the barrier that the Supremes had erected around them to defend against the wind blades. Magical rain? Chun Jianan, Inhu, and Jackdaw all sensed something different about the rain. This kid is quite interesting. Jackdaw reached out and caught the raindrops. As soon as they touched his hands, they turned into white mist. He's proficient in both wind and rain. It looks like he's walking on the Tao of wind and the Tao of rain. Moreover, his comprehension of the Tao is quite good. The path of mediocrity won't amount to much. Chun Jianan snorted. As they chatted, the Yao and gods attacked Yi Zichen. Only the demons stood to the side, waiting for orders from Jackdaw. Brother Jackdaw, could it be that you're not interested in the Xinyuan sword? Chun Jianan arched his brows. Cut the crap. If I wasn't interested, why would I come here? Jackdaw's mouth was as unforgiving as ever. He said disdainfully, I just don't want to outnumber you. Even if I win, it'll be an unfair victory. He was obviously criticizing Chun Jianan and Inhu for relying on their numbers to bully Yi Zichen. However, Jackdaw stood on the moral high ground and attacked them. Chun Jianan and the others merely smiled calmly. In their hearts, however, they cursed Jackdaw for having a screw loose. Yi Zichen's cultivation was far below that of Sky Supreme. He'd never even considered summoning the Yao from the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. The strongest cultivator on the first floor was a 9th stage Earth Supreme, while the weakest here were Sky Supremes. Summoning them out would just be throwing their lives away, but he could use the Tao of the 5 elements to deal with them for a while. Rain, form a dragon. At his command, the magical rain in the sky really did condense into a roaring water dragon. Of course, it wasn't just rain that could condense. Wind could as well. However, right now, Yi Zichen needed the 9 tornadoes to create a fierce gale to restrict the Supreme's movements. The water dragon roared, and as soon as it opened its mouth, it sprayed arrows of magical rain onto the Supremes. The rain was on the same level as the wind blades. After condensing into water arrows, their attacks became incomparably sharp. The water arrows directly pierced through the bodies of the 3rd stage Sky Supremes and below. The condensed water dragon was quite effective, but condensing it required an enormous amount of magical rain. It wasn't enough to deal with so many Sky Supremes at all. Lightning, thunder, fire. By now, Yi Zichen couldn't hold back any longer. He released all of the great Tao of the 5 elements. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. Fierce winds howled, rain poured down, lightning flashed, thunder roared, and heavenly flames burned the earth. How is this possible? Inhu and Chun Jianan exclaimed in unison. When they saw the Tao of the 5 elements appear around Yi Zichen, they froze. That's the Tao of the 5 elements. Chun Jianan, who'd previously looked down on Yi Zichen's Tao of the 5 elements, was so shocked he almost bit his tongue. Ever since the 5 elements' great emperor died and destroyed his Tao heart of the 5 elements, no one else has walked the path of the Tao of the 5 elements. This kid now has the 5 elements. Could it be that he wants to forge his own path through the Tao of the 5 elements and condense his Tao heart? That's not all. Look at his understanding of the Tao of the 5 elements. They complement each other. I'm afraid his understanding of the Tao of the 5 elements has already reached initial success. Inhu knit his brows, but despite himself, he couldn't help but admire Yi Zichen. All of them walked the path of their predecessors. With a Tao heart, they didn't need to explore their own paths. But Yi Zichen was different. He was fumbling around on his own. He'd forcefully carved out his own path, which was thousands, if not tens of thousands, of times more difficult than theirs. However, admiration was one thing. The Yao had to obtain the Xinyuan sword no matter what. Inhu narrowed his eyes, twisted his neck, and took a few steps forward. At the same time, his gaze landed on Chun Jianan and Jackdaw. We all know how powerful the Tao of the 5 elements is. Relying on them to steal the Xinyuan sword is no longer possible. Let's not just watch the show. Let's attack. If you want to attack, then attack. I don't like bullying the few with numbers. Jackdaw shrugged. Inhu didn't respond to Jackdaw's decision. Instead, he looked at Chun Jianan, who nodded. Chun Jianan swung his divine sword with all his might, slicing apart the waterfall of magical rain.